Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Midnight Stories. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I thought it would be nice if everyone could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Alright, let's get comfy, relax, and begin. My coworker Steve had mentioned his family's old hunting cabin a few times over the years, mostly in the context of funny stories about his uncles or about how remote it was. When I said I needed a weekend away from everything, just to unplug and breathe, he offered it without hesitation. No one's used it in a long time, he said. Probably a year or more. But if you don't mind dust and maybe a spider or two, it's all yours. He gave me the keys and some basic directions. The cabin was in a forested area a few hours outside the city. No service, no neighbors, and no noise. That sounded exactly like what I needed. The drive was long, winding through smaller and smaller roads, until finally turning onto a gravel track barely wide enough for my car. It was getting dark when I got there, maybe a little after 8 p.m., and the air had that heavy stillness to it that comes just before full nightfall in the woods. The cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by dense trees. No other houses nearby, not even a light in the distance. It was a small one-story place, wood-paneled, with a porch and a tin roof that looked like it had seen its share of storms. When I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the first thing I noticed was the smell, musty and dry like a mix of old wood, dust, and the kind of still air that collects in a place left alone too long. I clicked on the battery-powered lantern I brought and started unpacking. The inside of the cabin was simple: a little kitchen area, a table with a few mismatched chairs, a couch that sagged in the middle, and a short hallway that led to a single bedroom and a tiny bathroom. I took my time settling in, opened a few windows to let in some fresh air, then dropped my bag in the bedroom. That's when I saw it. On the kitchen table, 2 ceramic mugs, both used. One had the brown stains of old coffee. The other had the faint ring of something like tea. It stopped me for a second. I had only brought one travel mug from home, and I hadn't even touched it yet. My first thought was that maybe Steve or one of his family members had been here more recently than he remembered and just left them out. Still, it was odd because the rest of the cabin was clean, surprisingly so. No dust on the counters, no clutter. The bed was made. Even the bathroom was tidy. The mugs felt out of place. I checked the rest of the cabin just to be sure I was alone. I opened every cabinet, looked under the bed, checked the bathroom. The front door had been locked when I got there, and all the windows were shut. Everything was still and quiet. Nothing to make me think someone had broken in or was hiding out. I figured maybe Steve just forgot he'd been up here last fall or something. I left the mugs where they were and spent the rest of the evening reading a book I brought, curled up on the couch with a blanket and a lantern. It took me a while to fall asleep. The forest outside was louder than I expected. Lots of night insects, the occasional rustle of leaves. A couple of times I thought I heard something bigger, maybe a deer walking through the brush, but I told myself that was normal. It's the woods. There's always something moving out there. I fell asleep eventually. The lantern dimmed down low on the nightstand. Then, sometime around 3 a.m., I woke up. Not suddenly, but with that slow, creeping awareness that something isn't right. The air felt colder than before, and there was a sound, a creaking sound, like a hinge. I laid there completely still, listening. There it was again, the slow groan of a door swinging open. I sat up in bed, heart thudding hard. I was sure I'd locked the front door. I had checked it twice before turning in. I grabbed my phone off the nightstand and turned on the flashlight, the beam cutting a narrow path through the dark hallway. I stepped out of the bedroom, moving as quietly as I could. My socks made no sound on the wooden floor. The living room was empty. The couch, the table, everything where I'd left it, except the front door. It was open, not wide, but open enough to see the darkness beyond it and feel the chill from outside. The weirdest part was the mugs. They were gone. The table was bare. I stood frozen for a full minute, just staring at that door. My brain couldn't make sense of it. I hadn't heard footsteps, no voices, nothing breaking, just the creak of the door, and then nothing. No wind either. It was a still night. I didn't bother checking the rest of the cabin again. I walked straight to the bedroom, threw everything I could into my bag in under a minute, and left. I didn't even turn off the lantern. I just grabbed my keys, slammed the door shut behind me, and ran to the car. I locked it the second I was inside and started the engine with shaking hands. I drove straight out of there, headlights cutting through the forest road, every shadow making me flinch. I didn't stop until I hit the highway, and even then, I kept going for another hour before pulling into a 24-hour gas station around dawn. I parked near the lights, sat in my car, and just tried to breathe. I didn't sleep. I didn't even feel tired. My mind was racing, trying to explain what had happened. Later that day, when I was back in town, I called Steve. I didn't want to sound like I was accusing him of anything weird, so I just told him what happened as plainly as I could. I mentioned the mugs, the open door, and asked if maybe someone else in his family had been using the place recently. His answer was short. No, he said. No one's been up there since last summer. I swear, we haven't touched it since the hunting trip last year. And we didn't even use mugs. We always brought paper cups or drank straight from canteens. That didn't sit right with me. I asked him if he was sure. He paused, then said, the only mugs I remember were old ceramic ones. One of them had a crack. Pretty sure we threw them out years ago. I didn't know what to say to that. I thank him for letting me use the place and ended the call. I haven't talked to him about it again. Haven't been back to the cabin either. Probably never will. There's no explanation that makes sense to me. Someone was in that cabin, maybe living there, maybe just passing through. I don't know how they got in or how they left without making a sound. I don't know why they took the mugs or why they opened the door in the middle of the night. Maybe they were watching the whole time. Maybe they wanted me to know they were there. All I know is something was wrong. Something that made every part of me scream to get out. And I listened. That was the only smart thing I did all weekend. Leaving the second things didn't feel right. It still gets to me sometimes, late at night when things are too quiet. I'll think about that open door and those mugs that no one was supposed to use. It makes my skin crawl, because the worst part isn't that I was alone out there. It's that I wasn't. We were 2 days into a 5-day, 150-mile canoe trip down the Yukon River. The plan was simple. Start on the south end of Lake LaBerge and stick close to the shoreline the entire way. Never more than 100 yards out. The water was deadly cold, and we knew if we went in, we had maybe 20 minutes before things started to shut down. We had planned it all out. Maps, gear, weather forecasts, satellite communication, if it came to that. But even with all that prep, nothing really prepares you for how big and unforgiving that lake feels once you're actually out there. The first day had been rough. The wind had been up since we launched, steady and loud, cutting sideways through the channel and making every paddle stroke feel like a fight. We made barely half the distance we'd hoped to cover. By the time we pulled off the water that night, we were beat. We didn't even bother with the stove. Just tore into some jerky, pitched the tent half-assed, and collapsed inside. The wind never stopped. All night, it howled through the trees, flattening the edges of the tent and rattling everything that wasn't staked down tight. Next morning, same story. Wind still going, and we were already talking through backup plans. Maybe we'd have to split one of the longer days into two. Maybe cut out a planned side hike. We didn't want to be out longer than 5 days. The river wasn't too forgiving this time of year, and once we were past the lake section, things would get easier, but only if we stayed on schedule. But sometime around noon on that second day, the wind dropped off. Just gone, like a switch flipped. The trees stopped swaying. The surface of the lake turned to glass. No chop, no white caps, not even a ripple. It looked fake, like someone had laid a sheet of black metal over the water. We both knew it wouldn't last. That lake is known for turning on you fast, but when you're already behind and the water suddenly gives you a break, it's tempting to try to claw back some of the lost time. There was a spot on the map we talked about the night before, a long curve in the shoreline with 2 rocky peninsulas that jutted out into the lake. Going around them would take almost an hour, but if we cut straight across the bay that opened between them, it would cut our time nearly in half. On the map, it looked like a no-brainer, and now with the lake dead calm, it looked like the window we needed. So we went for it. About 5 minutes in, everything still looked fine. I kept glancing back at the shoreline, still close enough to make out individual tree trunks. The lake was so quiet we could hear birds calling from the far side. I started to think we'd made the right call. Maybe the wind was done for the day. Maybe the weather had finally turned. Then I noticed the sky. It happened fast. The clouds that were way off toward the mountains earlier now looked a whole lot closer. A thick, low line of dark gray started to stretch above the treetops on the horizon behind us. I looked over to my right and saw another wall of cloud moving in from the west. They weren't white and fluffy. They were dark, heavy, and packed and tight. A few seconds later, I felt the first gust of wind. It came straight across the surface of the water, turning it from glass to a shimmer and then to chop in a matter of seconds. The wind hit hard and the temperature dropped instantly. It felt like we had paddled straight into a fridge. And just like that, the lake was alive. Waves started to build out of nowhere. 1 foot, then 2. Within minutes, we were looking at whitecaps and rollers pushing hard toward the center of the lake. The water slammed into the sides of the canoe and sprayed cold across our backs and arms. And we were half a mile from shore. I remember the exact moment it shifted from concern to fear. It was when I realized we were no longer moving forward. We were paddling hard, but getting nowhere. The waves had gotten big enough that every time we tried to angle the canoe toward the shore, we'd lose stability. The only thing keeping us upright was turning the bow into the waves, and that meant we were stuck, holding our position, trying not to get rolled. Then came the thunder. Low at first, then deep and angry. A minute later, lightning flashed across the sky, followed by another crack, louder this time and closer. It lit up the wall of clouds, and the shadows over the lake turned from gray to nearly black. That was when my arms started to go numb. Not from fear, though that was part of it, but from how hard we were working just to stay upright. Every paddle stroke was a battle. Every wave that hit felt like it might be the one to tilt us just enough to lose balance. And we were drenched. The wind drove the rain sideways, and the tops of the waves were blowing off in mist. I couldn't see a thing without squinting. 45 minutes. That's how long it lasted. It felt like hours. My shoulders were screaming. My legs were cramping from bracing inside the canoe. We didn't speak. We just paddled, focused, locked into that motion. Dip, pull, recover. Over and over. At one point, I caught myself shaking, not just from cold, but from the realization that if we flipped, that was it. No rescue. No warm blanket. Just cold water and a ticking clock. Eventually, the wind started to die. It didn't stop, just eased up enough that the waves lost some of their height. Not much, but just enough. We started to inch sideways, carefully angling toward the shoreline, riding the side of each wave instead of taking them head on. It was slow, but it was progress. Maybe 20 minutes later, we could finally see the trees getting closer. The rain hadn't let up, but at least we could make out the shape of the shoreline again. When we hit the beach, we didn't even speak. Just dragged the canoe up past the high water line and fell into the sand. I remember the sound of my own breathing. Loud, raw, like I'd been running uphill for miles. My hands were trembling so bad I could barely undo the dry bag straps. We found a spot behind some driftwood and trees and built a makeshift shelter with the tarp. Didn't even set up the tent, just huddled underneath and stripped off the wet clothes, got into the dry layers. I sat there, shivering, listening to the wind in the branches and the distant rumbles of thunder moving away. My fingers felt like wood. My face was numb, but we were dry. We were alive. That was enough. We didn't get back on the water again until noon the next day. Waited until the sky cleared and the lake settled. Didn't say much that morning. Just packed slow, checked the gear twice, and eased back in when we were sure it was safe. We finished the trip without any more surprises, but that 45 minutes in the middle of Lake LaBerge is burned into my memory. I've never been so close to feeling like I might not make it out. Not because of anything dramatic or sudden, just slow, grinding fear and the kind of exhaustion that makes your body want to quit. And the scariest part wasn't the waves or the storm. It was knowing how fast everything can go wrong, even when you think you plan for it. We learned the hard way. Out there, you don't cut corners, even when the water looks calm, especially then. It was the middle of July, hot and sticky, the kind of heat that clings to your skin no matter how many times you jump in the water. I was camping with my 11-year-old niece at Keystone State Park in Pennsylvania. It was a busy weekend, the kind where every single site is taken and kids are riding bikes up and down the gravel loops until sunset. The air smelled like sunscreen and charcoal, and the sound of distant radios mixed with cicadas and the occasional slam of a car door. We'd set up our little two-person tent beneath a shady cluster of tall trees, not far from the public lake. Our site was across from another camper's, a solo setup, neat and quiet. We noticed an older man there when we first arrived the day before. He had one of those big canvas tents, the kind you only bother with if you're staying a while. We waved to each other in passing. He seemed content to sit in his folding chair reading, mostly to himself. That afternoon we'd gone swimming. The lake was cold at first, but perfect after a few minutes. We swam until our skin got that wrinkled look, and then we laid out on the grass to dry, eating peanut butter crackers from my backpack. We didn't bring towels, so our clothes stuck to us when we changed back into them in the little concrete bathhouse. My niece kept dragging her feet, collecting smooth rocks along the path back to our site. When we finally rounded the bend and our tent came into view, I slowed down. There were 2 park ranger SUVs and a local police cruiser parked near the road, just feet from our site. A yellow rope was draped loosely between some trees, sectioning off the site across from us, the one where the older man had been. 2 rangers were standing near the tent. One of them was talking into a radio, and another officer was scribbling in a small notebook. It looked too serious to be something small, and my stomach started to feel heavy. We kept walking quiet now. My niece looked up at me, sensing something wasn't right. As we got closer, one of the rangers walked over to us, holding up his hand to stop us before we reached our own picnic table. He leaned in and quietly told me there'd been an incident at the neighboring campsite. I nodded slowly, waiting for him to explain. My niece was holding my hand, but tried to wiggle closer, craning her neck to see what was going on. I gently stepped in front of her, but she wouldn't stop trying to look. The ranger lowered his voice even more. He told me the man staying across from us had passed away in his sleep. They believed it was natural causes. He was supposed to check out that morning, but when he didn't come by the ranger station or answer his phone, someone went to check. They found him in his tent, just lying there, peaceful, apparently. I blinked, trying to keep my expression calm. I nodded again. I didn't really know how to respond to something like that. I asked if we needed to move sites, but the rangers said it wouldn't be necessary. They were nearly done and would have the area cleared out within the hour. My niece, overhearing part of it, asked if someone had gotten hurt. I gave her a look and told her we'd talk later, but she wouldn't drop it. While the ranger went back to the others, my niece kept whispering questions. She was too smart for vague answers. I told her someone had passed away, an older man who was camping alone. She went quiet for a second, then looked back across the gravel road. His tent was still there, the flaps zipped shut. A red and white cooler sat untouched on the table, and a small pile of firewood was stacked neatly beside the fire ring. His camping chair was still there too, folded and leaning against a tree. It made the whole thing feel surreal. He couldn't be gone. It looked like he could come back any second and sit down with a sandwich and a cold soda. A few minutes later, a white van arrived and 2 people in dark clothing stepped out. One carried a clipboard and the other opened the back doors. I tried to distract my niece with snacks, pulling out a bag of trail mix and some Capri Suns, but her attention kept going back to that campsite. I didn't want her to see anything she shouldn't, but she wasn't dumb. She watched the same way people do when they know they shouldn't look but can't help it. They waited until we'd gone into our tent for a bit before they started moving things. I could hear them zipping the tent open, the sounds muffled but unmistakable. I told my niece to lay down for a bit. I pulled out a card game and tried to keep her occupied. She played a few rounds with me, but wasn't really paying attention. Eventually, everything quieted down. The vans and police cars left. One ranger stayed behind and put up a sign at the site entrance saying closed for maintenance. They hadn't packed up the man's gear though. His tent, cooler, wood, and some other stuff were still there. I guess someone else would come for it later. I didn't know what the procedure was for something like that. Later that evening, My niece was poking at the fire pit with a stick while I cooked up some hot dogs over the flames. She kept looking across the way. Then, just as casually as anything, she said, "Can we keep his firewood? He doesn't need it now." I looked up from the fire. I didn't say anything for a minute. I just stared at her, unsure whether to scold her or laugh or feel horrified. She wasn't being mean or cold. She wasn't old enough yet to understand the weight of death the way adults do. To her, it was just a thing that happened. And now there was a pile of unused firewood sitting there, and we were still going to be here another night. I told her we'd leave it alone for now. Someone might come to collect his things. She shrugged and went back to toasting her marshmallow like it was just any other day. But I couldn't stop thinking about the man across from us. That night, as the air cooled and the sky went from orange to dark blue, I sat in my camping chair long after my niece had gone into the tent to sleep. The fire crackled quietly, and the light from it barely reached the edges of our little clearing. I looked over at that tent across the road. The lantern inside had been turned off, the flaps still closed. It was quiet now, no one coming in or out. The kind of stillness that makes you feel like you're the last person awake on Earth. It bothered me in a way I didn't expect. Not in a scary way, but something deeper. Something about how sudden it was. He had been alive yesterday, probably cooking his own dinner, maybe reading in that same chair, listening to the same birds and kids laughing nearby. And now he was just gone. No warning. No one around to notice right away. Just a quiet end in a sleeping bag under some trees in a Pennsylvania campground. The next morning, the firewood was still there. No one had come to collect anything yet. I packed up slowly, taking my time. My niece asked again about the wood. I just shook my head and told her it wasn't ours to take. She didn't argue. We drove out of the campground a little after 10. The ranger gave us a polite wave at the exit. As we pulled away, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. His tent was still there. The site looked untouched, like someone had just gone for a short walk and would be back soon. But I knew he wasn't coming back, and I haven't forgotten that quiet little site across from ours. I don't think I ever will. I was a couple days into a cross-country drive, heading west through a stretch of winding mountain highway somewhere between Colorado and Utah. I had passed through a high-elevation pass, name unknown to me, and the road had narrowed into sharp turns lined with thick pine trees and steep rocky cliffs. The moon was out, but thin clouds covered parts of the sky, making everything dim and washed out in pale light. It was late, about 1 a.m. by my clock, and my eyes were starting to blur at the edges. I'd had enough caffeine for the day, and the buzz had worn off hours ago. There were no lights for miles, no houses, no rest stops, not even passing cars. I hadn't seen another vehicle since the gas station nearly an hour back, where I'd filled up, bought a stale sandwich, and stretched my legs. I was alone on that mountain road, just me and the soft roar of tires on asphalt. I knew I needed to stop soon. I wasn't nodding off yet, but I could feel it coming. I didn't want to push it too far and end up wrapped around a guardrail. After a slow descent from the peak, I spotted a gravel pull-off to the right. Just a patch of uneven ground carved into the side of the slope, framed by dark pines and the drop-off beyond. It was just wide enough to fit one car comfortably without being too close to the edge. I pulled in, shifted into park, and killed the engine. The headlights stayed on for a few seconds before clicking off, leaving me in full darkness. I sat there for a while, just listening. No bugs, no animals. Just wind filtering through the trees and an occasional creak as the car cooled. The night air outside was colder than I expected. I cracked the windows slightly to let in some fresh air, just enough to keep the car from getting stuffy. I pushed my seat back and bundled my hoodie under my head like a pillow. My phone had no signal, not that I planned to use it. I just set an alarm for 4:30 a.m. and hoped I'd get a few hours of sleep. I don't know how long I'd been out, but it couldn't have been more than an hour when I woke up. Something had changed. The inside of the car was still dark, but there was a glow behind me, white, steady light seeping around the edges of my rearview mirror. Headlights. I blinked, sat up a little. My neck was stiff. I adjusted my seat and looked behind me. Sure enough, a car had pulled into the gravel area behind mine. It wasn't close, maybe 20 or 30 feet back, but their headlights were pointed straight at me. Not bright enough to blind me, but enough to light up the back of my car and cast long shadows into the trees. At first, I figured it was another traveler doing what I did. Too tired to keep going, saw a safe place to stop. But the way they pulled in was odd. Slow, real slow, like they were easing in at a crawl. And once they stopped, they didn't turn off their engine. The headlights stayed on. The car just idled there, rumbling quietly in the night. I sat completely still. Something about it made me nervous. I couldn't see the driver, just the vague outline of the car. I waited. Maybe they were adjusting something or finishing a phone call. But 5 minutes passed, maybe more. The engine kept running, the lights stayed on, and nobody moved. I should have just left then, but I was groggy, confused. Part of me still thought it could be harmless. Maybe they were just too tired to notice how weird they were acting. Then the driver's door opened. I couldn't see much, just a faint movement of someone stepping out and closing the door, quietly, too quietly. No slam, just a gentle click like they didn't want to make noise. They didn't have a flashlight. No phone screen lit up. No cigarette glow. Just footsteps. Crunch, crunch, crunch on the loose gravel, slow and deliberate, getting closer to my window. I froze. My heartbeat started to pound in my ears. I didn't move, didn't even breathe too loud. The steps were slow, steady. Not wandering, not lost. They were coming straight toward my side of the car. I still couldn't see them. My side windows were fogged up from the inside, and the angle of the lights behind me kept the reflection strong. But I could hear them. Closer now. A few feet away. That was enough. I didn't take time to think. I grabbed the key, twisted it, and slammed my foot on the brake, shifting into drive as the engine roared to life. I turned the wheel hard left, floored the gas, and my tires kicked up gravel as I lurched out of the pull-off. My headlights lit up the pines ahead as I fishtailed slightly, then straightened out onto the empty highway. In the rearview mirror, I caught one last look. There was someone standing in the middle of the road, right in the path where I'd been parked, not moving, just watching me drive away, arms at their sides. No chase, no flashlight, no car door closing, just standing there. I didn't slow down for miles. The next town wasn't for another 30 miles, and I stayed wide awake the entire time. Every turn, every shadow, every dip in the road had my nerves twisted tight. I didn't even turn the radio on. I just listened to the engine and my own breathing. When I finally made it to town, someplace I can't even remember the name of, I pulled into the first gas station I saw, parked under the lights, and just sat there for a while. My hand was shaking, not violently, but enough that I couldn't trust myself to pour a coffee without spilling it. I stayed at that gas station until the sun started to rise. I didn't feel safe pulling off the road again. I didn't feel safe until I was back in heavy traffic, surrounded by other people. I never reported it. What would I even say? Someone parked behind me in the middle of nowhere and walked toward my car. They didn't knock, didn't yell, didn't do anything I could prove. But I know what I felt. That slow, deliberate walk. That silence. That presence right outside my window in the middle of nowhere. And the worst part was the way they stood there after. Not confused, not surprised, just watching. I still think about it sometimes when I drive late. I still check my mirrors too often. I still don't stop on empty highways if I can help it. Not unless there's real light. Not unless there's people around. I'll never sleep in my car like that again. A coworker of mine offered to let me borrow their family's old hunting cabin for a quiet weekend away. I didn't ask too many questions, just took the keys and directions. I've been feeling overwhelmed with work and needed the break. The cabin was in the woods a few hours outside the city, and I figured some fresh air, silence, and time away from screens would help clear my head. I left later than planned. The sun had already dipped below the trees by the time I turned off the main road and followed the gravel track for the last couple of miles. It was already dark when I pulled up in front of the cabin. The trees around it were dense and tall, blocking out what little light was left in the sky. I stepped out of the car and was hit with the kind of silence you only find deep in the woods. No cars, no voices, just the wind rustling through the pines and the occasional crack of a branch. The cabin was small, older but solid. One story, maybe 4 rooms total. It had that dark brown stained wood exterior and a covered porch that sagged a little on one side. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, flicking on the battery lantern I brought. The inside had that strong, musty smell of old wood, mixed with the faint scent of smoke. A stone fireplace took up one wall of the main room. There was a small kitchen area to the left, a table with 2 chairs, a counter, a few cupboards. A door to the right led to the bedroom, and another door near the back looked like it went to the bathroom. I set the lantern on the kitchen counter and started unloading my bag. I only brought 1 travel mug and 1 enamel plate, just enough for myself. As I moved toward the table to set things down, I noticed something odd. 2 mugs were already sitting on the table. Not clean ones, either. Both had rings of dried liquid inside. One even had a coffee stain dripping down the side. They weren't mine. I stood there for a moment just looking at them. My first thought was maybe someone else had stayed here recently and just hadn't cleaned up properly. But everything else in the cabin was clean. No dirty dishes in the sink, no trash left behind. The sheets on the bed looked freshly changed, folded tight and neat. The counter was wiped down, just those 2 mugs sitting there. I picked one up and sniffed it. Faint smell of coffee, maybe something stronger. I checked the rest of the cabin with the lantern, closets, bathroom, even under the bed. No signs of anyone. Nothing out of place. No bags, no clothes, nothing that made it seem like someone else was still around. Just those mugs. I figured it wasn't worth worrying about. Maybe a caretaker had stopped by and had a drink, or maybe my co-worker forgot to mention someone else had used the place recently. I was tired from the drive and didn't want to psych myself out the first night. I rinsed the mugs, stacked them in the sink, and got ready for bed. It was colder than I expected, even with the extra blanket I brought. The mattress was thin and the wood frame creaked whenever I shifted. Still, I eventually dozed off. At some point during the night, I woke up. I wasn't sure why at first. I opened my eyes and stared into the dark, listening. The lantern was off, and I hadn't bothered lighting the fireplace. It was pitch black in the cabin, the kind of dark where you can't see your own hand. Then I heard it, the wooden boards of the porch outside groaning under someone's weight. One slow, deliberate step at a time. The cabin was old enough that the wood made noise even under a squirrel's paws, but this was different. These were heavier steps. Human. My body went cold. I held my breath and stayed completely still. The sound moved across the porch slowly, like someone pacing or trying to get a better look inside. Then stopped. I heard the metal clink of the door handle jiggle twice, maybe 3 times. Not yanked or forced, just tested. The door was locked, thankfully. I stayed frozen in bed, heart pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. I didn't move, didn't even turn toward the window. I just lay there, eyes wide, listening. After what felt like minutes, the footsteps slowly backed away. I didn't hear them go far, just off the porch and onto the dirt, then nothing. Silence returned, but not the peaceful kind. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, like it's hiding something. I didn't sleep again that night. I stayed in bed, watching the shadows stretch across the room as the first pale light started to come through the window. Around 6 or 7, when the sun had fully come up and I felt brave enough, I got up and opened the door. The porch boards creaked exactly like they had the night before. I walked to the edge and looked around. Trees and underbrush in every direction. No car tracks, no people, nothing. Then I looked down at the wooden boards. There were boot prints, muddy ones, big too, larger than mine, maybe size 12 or 13. The treads were thick, deep. They started near the steps, paced around near the front of the door, then disappeared into the dirt leading into the trees. I checked my own boots against them. They didn't match. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the prints, trying to make sense of it. Someone had definitely been there. Someone who wasn't supposed to be. I thought about what would have happened if I'd left the door unlocked, or if they tried harder to get in. I packed my things fast. No breakfast. Just tossed everything into my bag and got back in the car. As I backed down the gravel road, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting someone to step out of the trees. But no one did. When I got back into town, I called my coworker and told them what happened. They were surprised, but didn't seem too concerned. Said the cabin hadn't been used in a while, and maybe a hunter or local had wandered close by mistake. I wanted to believe that, but something about it didn't sit right with me. Those mugs, the prints, the way the person didn't knock or call out. They just tried the handle. I haven't gone back since. Probably never will. And I always double check the locks now, no matter where I'm staying. I took the cabin because it was cheap and close to where I'd be working for the next 3 months. It was deep in southern Utah, about 20 minutes outside of a small desert town that didn't even have a grocery store, just a gas station with dusty windows and a diner that only opened for breakfast. The company I worked for had set me up with a list of rental options, and most of them were taken by the time I called. The cabin was the last available. The owner said it was rustic but clean, and that was exactly what it turned out to be. It was a small, one-room structure with a bed tucked into one corner, a kitchenette along the back wall, and a wood stove in the center. The floor was uneven and made of old planks, creaky in spots. The walls were rough pine, stained with time and dust. It had electricity and running water, though the water smelled faintly like rust sometimes. There was no internet, no TV, and cell service came and went depending on where I stood. It didn't matter. I wasn't planning to spend much time there outside of sleeping. My job kept me outdoors for long hours every day, and by the time I got back, all I wanted was a hot shower and a bed. The first 2 weeks were quiet. I'd come home, cook something simple, read a bit, and then go to bed with the window cracked open to let in the cool desert air. I heard coyotes often, and once I saw a ringtail dart past my headlights on the dirt road. There were signs of mice in the cabin when I first moved in, but a few traps took care of that. Nothing unusual, especially for a place that far out. I didn't mind the isolation. Honestly, I liked it. I felt separate from the rest of the world out there. Then one night, around midnight, I heard the sound. It was a bang, a low, hard thud, like someone hitting wood from underneath. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when it jolted me upright. My first thought was that something had fallen. I got up, walked around, checked a few shelves and counters. Everything was where it should be. I stood still for a while, listening. Another bang, then another. Slow, even. It was like someone down below was knocking with a hammer. One knock every 2 or 3 seconds. I knew there was a crawl space under the cabin. The cabin sat up on short concrete piers, maybe 2 feet off the ground. I noticed a small trapdoor in the floor near the back wall when I first moved in. It had a padlock on it, rusted and stiff. I never thought much about it, probably just where the pipes ran. But now that noise was coming from right under it. I could feel the dull thump through my feet when I stood nearby. I stood there for what felt like 10 minutes, just listening. My heart was pounding, not fast, but heavy, like it had to push harder to keep going. I kept telling myself it was an animal. Maybe a raccoon or a fox had crawled in there and was bumping around. But animals don't move like that. Not so steady, not so deliberate. After a while, the banging stopped. I stayed up for another hour just in case. Nothing else happened that night. The next morning, I checked the trapdoor. The padlock was still there, but it wasn't hooked through the latch. It was just hanging loose like someone had unlocked it and never bothered to refasten it. I hadn't touched that lock once since I moved in. There was no reason it should have been like that. I didn't open the door. I don't even know why. I think something in me just didn't want to know. I wanted to go on pretending it was some old pipes settling or a possum or something I could ignore. I just closed the latch and hooked the padlock back on. Not locked, just hooked, and went to work like normal. That day, I couldn't focus. I kept thinking about the banging. I tried replaying it in my head, measuring the rhythm of it. I couldn't convince myself it was random. It wasn't like a water pipe knocking or an animal scratching. It was too solid, too controlled. I stayed out late that night, sitting in the company truck for longer than I needed to after the shift ended. I ate in town and drove slow on the way back. The sun had just dipped behind the hills when I got to the cabin. I sat in the car for a long time, staring at that little dark shape against the desert. I didn't want to go in, but I did. Everything was just as I'd left it. I made a cup of tea and sat on the bed, keeping the lights low. I didn't hear anything that night. No bangs, no bumps, nothing. Still, I couldn't sleep. The next few nights were quiet too. I almost convinced myself that I'd imagined the whole thing. That maybe the lock had been hanging loose from the beginning and I'd only just noticed it. That maybe the banging had been something outside or a dream I'd woken up in the middle of. Then it happened again. This time I was fully awake, reading by the dim yellow light of the lamp. It started just before midnight. Same sound, same rhythm. One knock every few seconds, but this time it was louder. It was coming from directly beneath the trapdoor again. The whole cabin seemed to shiver with each hit. I didn't move. I just stared at that part of the floor. I don't know how long I sat like that. The knocking went on for at least 10 minutes. I could feel sweat on my arms, on my neck, despite the cool air. It stopped again, just as suddenly as before. When it was over, I grabbed my boots, my keys, and my bag, and went straight to the car. I slept there, in the driver's seat, parked under the only tree near the cabin. I kept the doors locked, my phone in my lap. I didn't go back inside that night. The next morning, I packed up some clothes and essentials and moved everything into the trunk of my car. I told my supervisor I had a mouse problem in the cabin and I was more comfortable sleeping outside. He laughed and said, "Whatever works, man." I slept in my car for the rest of the season. I'd park in different spots along the road some nights just to break the routine. I used the cabin during the day to shower and cook, but I never stayed past sundown. I didn't even sit down when I was inside. I kept moving. I kept the trapdoor in the corner of my eye. One afternoon I got bold. I decided I needed to at least look at the underside of the cabin. I waited until the sun was high and hot, and then I crouched down and looked into the gap between the dry dirt and the cabin floor. There was a wire mesh tacked up along the outer beams, meant to keep animals out. But I could see something odd, little bits of broken wood and dust beneath the trapdoor, like something had been chipping at it from below. I didn't stay down there long. I never opened the trapdoor. I didn't want to know what was under there. I didn't want to see anything that would stick in my head longer than it already had. I finished my job, turned in my keys, and drove out the same dirt road I'd come in on. I never went back. I still don't know what was under that cabin. I don't think I want to. It was the middle of January when the three of us, me, Sam, and Nate, decided to rent a cabin up north near the lake. It was one of those impulsive ideas that sounded fun in a group chat, but started to feel a little off once we got there. The cabin itself was small, just a single-story wooden box with a low slanted roof, tucked into a patch of thick pines near the frozen lake. The road leading in had been barely plowed, and we had to park the truck 100 yards away and hike in through knee-deep snow with our gear. We'd brought enough food for the weekend, some cheap bourbon, and 3 bundles of dry firewood we picked up on the way. The place had no electricity, just a fireplace and a couple of old gas lanterns, and there was a bigger woodpile out back that the rental listing had promised was ours to use. The temperature dropped hard after dark, well below freezing, and we realized pretty quick that the fire wasn't just for comfort. It was survival. The inside of the cabin was simple. 2 small bedrooms with thin mattresses, a main room with a stone fireplace, and a kitchen area with an old metal sink and a wooden table. The floorboards creaked and the wind slipped through the cracks in the old wood, but we were in good spirits. We played cards, took turns keeping the fire going, and by midnight we were all halfway drunk and joking about how horror movies always star in places like this. By about 1 a.m., the fire had started to burn low. I got up and added a few more logs from the pile we brought inside, then wrapped myself back in my sleeping bag near the hearth. Nate was snoring softly in the corner. Sam was on the couch, bundled up tight, not asleep, but quiet. At 2 a.m., something woke me. I didn't sit up at first, just opened my eyes and stared at the dim orange light flickering across the ceiling. Then it hit me, the light was going out. Fast. Within seconds, the cabin dropped into that kind of cold dark that creeps under your skin and settles into your bones. The fire hadn't burned out gradually, it was dead, like someone had dumped water on it. I sat up. Sam was already awake, his breath showing in the air, and Nate stirred, groaning. That's when we noticed the cold wind blowing through the room. I turned toward the door and saw it swinging open, the snow outside blowing in hard. The lantern hanging beside the door swayed with each gust. I got up and went to close it, but something stopped me cold. The firewood pile, just inside the door, the one we brought in, was gone. Every piece. The woven basket we'd carried it in was still there, but empty. Just a few with chips scattered around. At first, I thought maybe Nate had moved it and forgotten, or maybe it had fallen over somehow. but there was nothing. It was just gone. I stepped out into the snow and felt the ice bite my skin instantly. The cold was brutal. I looked over at the wood pile just outside under the little overhang beside the cabin. That pile too, every single log was gone. Not just knocked over or disturbed. Gone, like it had never been there. The snow was fresh. It had been falling lightly for hours, but not enough to bury anything. And yet there were no tracks, just our own, leading back and forth between the truck and the cabin, already half filled with new snow. I looked farther out, scanning the white expanse between the trees. Nothing, not a single mark. I went back in and shut the door tight, using the heavy bolt and dragging one of the chairs against it. We checked the windows. Locked. No sign of forced entry. No broken glass. Nothing stolen. Nothing moved except the firewood. The weirdest part was how quiet it had been. There were no sounds. No footsteps on the porch. No creaking wood. Nothing. I couldn't understand how someone, or something, could have taken it all without making a sound, and without leaving even a single print in the snow. We gathered in the center of the room, each of us still wrapped in sleeping bags. We brought our knives, just standard camping ones, and we kept them close. We didn't speak much, just sat with our backs to the walls, eyes on the windows and the door, listening for any sound. The cold got worse as the night went on. I've never felt anything like it. It didn't just numb your fingers or sting your face. It got into your chest, made your lungs hurt with every breath. By dawn, our teeth were chattering and our water bottles had frozen solid. None of us had slept. Every so often we'd hear a crack in the woods, but it could have been anything. The cold, the trees settling, some animal out there. Still, we held tight to our knives and stayed close. When the sun finally came up, it lit the room just enough to see our own breath hanging in the air like fog. I opened the door slowly, heart pounding, expecting maybe to find something, anything, explaining what had happened. There was still nothing. No tracks, no wood, no sign of anything disturbed. We walked around the cabin, checking behind trees, scanning the frozen lake. The snow was untouched except where we had walked. Not even the hint of a trail leading off into the trees. Nothing. We packed up fast. None of us said much. We didn't even eat. Just grabbed our gear and made the cold, silent walk back to the truck. By the time we got on the road, I could finally feel my fingers again. Back home, I kept thinking about that night. I went over every detail. Could have been animals, maybe a bear, but bears don't carry off firewood, and there would have been tracks. Could someone have been watching us, waited until we fell asleep, then taken it? But again, no tracks, no sounds. And why just the wood? I even called the rental company later just to ask if anything weird had happened there before. They said no, just a standard winter cabin. Said they'd check on the wood pile, but never called back. The three of us haven't talked much about that trip since. It's like we're all still trying to make sense of it in our own way, and talking about it just makes it worse. I don't have an explanation. I've stopped looking for one. All I know is that fire didn't go out on its own. Oh, it didn't vanish. And someone was out there with us that night, close enough to take what we needed to survive without ever being seen, heard, or leaving a single trace behind. I haven't gone back to that cabin. I won't. We were camping in Cornwall when I was around 14. It was one of those family trips we used to take during the summer holidays. Me, my mom, dad, and my younger brother, who was 12 at the time. We had this big family tent with 3 sleeping pods that sloped down towards the ground. One for my parents, one for me, and one for my brother. The center area was this open space where we kept our stuff, cooler, chairs, a fold-up table, a couple of crates filled with snacks and pans, muddy shoes pile near the entrance. It was one of those canvas tents that sort of droop and breathe with the wind, nothing like the rigid pop-up kind you see now. We were staying at a basic campsite, surrounded by fields with stone walls and hedgerows. There were maybe 8 or 10 other families camped out, spread across a gentle hill that sloped down toward a clump of trees and a small brook. The day had been pretty normal. Cloudy skies, occasional drizzle, the kind of weather you just get used to when you're camping in the UK. We had gone into a nearby village to walk around, get some pasties, bought fudge from a shop with a crooked sign. That night it got cold. I remember my sleeping bag being damp at the foot end and curling my legs up because I didn't want to deal with wet socks. I must have drifted off around 10 or 11. It was still dark when I woke up. I didn't know what time it was, but it felt deep in the night. My eyes opened to pitch black, and I couldn't figure out what had pulled me out of sleep. Then I felt it, this low vibration, like a deep thud from far away. The ground didn't shake violently, but it moved just enough that I thought I imagined it at first. Then I heard the sound, a scream, not a person, more like a high-pitched, bellowing wail, like something wounded or lost. It came again, louder this time, and closer. I lay there, heart thudding, trying to figure out what animal could make a sound like that. Then everything happened at once. The tent shook violently, not just the walls flapping, but the entire structure seemed to cave inwards for a moment. One of the poles clattered, and I heard something heavy crashing outside. There was a loud grunt, like air being forced out of a huge set of lungs, and the whole tent kind of lurched and tilted. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was trying to escape my chest. My sleeping bag was tangled around my legs, and I scrambled to unzip it. I heard my mom shout from their pod, but it was all drowned out by my brother screaming. He was yelling, panicked, desperate. It wasn't a cry for help. It was sheer instinct, like something had snapped in his brain and was telling him to get out now. I kicked my way out of my pod and stumbled into the middle of the tent. The air inside was heavy, full of moisture and a thick, earthy smell like wet soil and something else, something warm and musky. My parents had already climbed out of their pod. My dad had grabbed the torch from the folding table and was shining it around wildly. The beam hit the far end of the tent, and we all stopped. My brother's pod, the one at the back, was half collapsed. The fabric had been crushed inwards like a hand had pressed down on it from above. One of the tent poles had snapped clean in two, and there was mud and grass smeared across the outer layer. My brother came out of the pod, crawling on his hands and knees. His face was pale, and he was crying, not full-on sobbing, just tears running down his cheeks like his body hadn't even registered what happened yet. His sleeping bag was still halfway wrapped around him. His whole pod looked like it had been stomped on. Outside, we could hear shouting, distant voices, the campsite owner yelling something we couldn't make out. Then, clearer, he called out for everyone to stay in their tents. Over and over, stay in your tents. Don't come out. We listened. Nobody moved. The screaming sound came again, right outside this time. Not human, but close enough that it sent a shiver through my entire body. There was a thudding of hooves, heavy ones, followed by a metallic clatter like something had hit one of the camp tables or a car. My dad held the torch tightly, shining it toward the zippered door, but none of us made a move to open it. Eventually, the noise faded. The shouting continued, now mixed with the sound of other campers waking up, unzipping tents, voices asking questions, murmuring. Then the quiet set in. Not total silence, just that uneasy stillness where everything seems to pause. I remember the cold then, how it had crept in and settled over everything. My brother was sitting in the middle of the tent, knees pulled up to his chest, still crying quietly. My mom sat with him, trying to keep him warm with one of the blankets. It was maybe 30 minutes later when we heard footsteps outside. The tent zip pulled back, and the campsite owner poked his head in, face pale and sweating. He looked shaken. He told us quickly, still trying to be calm, that a cow and her calf had escaped from the field next to the site. They had somehow wandered in through a broken section of the dry stone wall that bordered the campsite. The calf had panicked, apparently from the unfamiliar surroundings or maybe the tents themselves, and started baying. That was the screaming sound we heard. The mother, already anxious, had followed and began running around, trampling the area. What none of us had known at the time was that she had actually stepped on a few tents. Our car, parked next to the tent, had also been bumped or climbed on and had rolled slightly onto the side of my brother's pod. The weight had pressed the tent down before the cow moved off. If my brother had been lying flat, especially with his head at the far, and like he usually slept, the weight of the cow or even the car could have crushed his skull or chest. But he'd been sitting up, trying to figure out what the noise was, trying to unzip his bag and look outside. The campsite owner was in a full panic mode behind his eyes, but trying to keep things together. Eventually, Some kind of local farmhand came by and helped lead the animals back through the broken wall, which they later repaired with a few boards. Other campers were up now. People were talking outside, swapping stories, checking for damage. Some tents were wrecked. One camper had a gas stove knocked over. Another had a cooler full of food crushed on her hoof marks. The worst damage, by far, was our tent. We spent the rest of that night in the car. It was cramped and uncomfortable. I couldn't sleep. My brother didn't say much. I kept thinking about that moment. The sound of the tent crumpling, his shouting, the way the light from the torch hit the crushed pod, how real and close the whole thing had been. By morning, we packed up. We didn't say much, just took everything down slowly, folded what we could, left the broken poles behind. The weather was gray again, a little rain falling. Everyone around us gave little nods, like we'd all been through something strange together, but nobody really wanted to talk about it. Later, my parents bought a sturdier tent, one with reinforced poles and less separate pods. My brother never went camping again. I went a few times after, but it never felt the same. That night made something clear to me. How close we all are to disaster. How sometimes it's not about bad people or ghost stories or monsters. Sometimes it's just a cow, panicked and out of place, stepping once in the wrong spot. And sometimes that's all it takes. We went camping in the White Mountains of New Hampshire last month. Me, my girlfriend, and a mutual friend of ours. It was early spring, still cold at night, and we were up in elevation a bit, so it was chillier than we expected. The campground wasn't completely empty, but it was quiet. Maybe 5 or 6 other sites were in use, scattered out far enough that we felt alone. It was a new moon, so when the sun went down, it got dark. The kind of dark where you can't see your hand in front of your face if your flashlight is off. No city glow out there either. Just black woods, cold air, and quiet. We got into our site mid-afternoon, set up the tent, got a small fire going, and made dinner. The usual stuff. It was a nice night, clear skies, crisp air, and the kind of stillness that makes you feel like you're far from everything. By around 10, we doused the fire and were getting ready to sleep. I remembered the trash had to go up to the dumpster near the entrance, so I offered to take it. The walk wasn't far, maybe 5 minutes up the gravel path to the road and back. I brought a flashlight with me, a small one that clipped to my jacket. It wasn't super bright, but enough to make out the trail. The walk there was uneventful. Cold air, the sound of the gravel under my boots, some wind now and then. I tossed the bag into the dumpster and started walking back. I was about halfway back to our campsite when something caught my eye to the left in an empty campsite, maybe 30 feet off the trail. I stopped walking. At first, I thought it was someone. It looked like a tall, pale shape standing toward the back of the empty site, not near the fire ring or table, but further back where the tree started. My first instinct was that it was a person, maybe someone gathering wood or just standing there, but it wasn't moving. I shone my flashlight in that direction and tried to make out what it was. The light wasn't strong enough to reach all the way clearly, but it was enough to catch white. Pale white, vertical, about the height of a person. No movement. I stood there for a bit, squinting, thinking maybe it was a birch tree. There were birch trees in the area. I waited, just watching, expecting some sign of motion. Nothing. Eventually, I told myself that's all it was, just a tree in a weird spot. Something about the contrast made it look like a person. I walked back to our site, still uneasy but not alarmed. We slept in a large 3-person tent. Thick sleeping bags, a couple of foam pads, and extra blankets. It was cold enough that you could see your breath. Sometime after midnight, I woke up needing to pee. I unzipped the tent quietly, trying not to wake the others. I stepped outside barefoot in my boots, just pulling on my jacket and headlamp. As soon as I turned on the headlamp and stepped out, I noticed something strange. Around the tent, in maybe a 10 or 15-foot radius, I saw what looked like glowing red-orange dots. At first, I froze. They looked like coals, like someone had scattered them across the forest floor. They weren't everywhere, just in spots. Some were close, maybe 2 or 3 feet from the tent, and others further back toward the woods. They weren't bright enough to cast light, just these faint glowing dots on the ground. I thought maybe it was some kind of fungus or mineral reflection. I crouched down to look closer at one, and it did look a lot like a small coal, round, glowing slightly, but no smoke, no heat, and not burning anything around it. I stood there for a while just looking. I didn't hear anything, no twigs snapping, no footsteps, just the same still air and that deep forest quiet. My girlfriend had woken up too and came out a few minutes later, whispering that she had to pee. I pointed at the glowing things. She stopped, looked around, and saw them too. Neither of us said anything. It was too strange, and something about it made us feel like speaking would somehow make it worse. We didn't go far from the tent, just did what we had to and went back in quickly. I didn't sleep much after that. In the morning, I was still trying to convince myself that the glowing dots were maybe mushrooms, maybe some weird mineral or lichen. I even started to wonder if there was some kind of reflection happening from distant campfires or headlights. But when the sun came up and we stepped outside, there was nothing. The forest floor looked normal. Brown needles, leaves, twigs. No signs of any coals. No ash, no burn spots. It was like they were never there. I told the others about the pale figure I thought I saw near the empty site. I led them over to where I remembered it being. The campsite was empty, no tents, no fire, no signs anyone had been there recently. I checked toward the back where I thought I'd seen the pale shape. Nothing but dark barked trees. No birch trees. None close enough to match the spot where I saw it. We didn't talk too much about it at the time. It felt weird, and none of us had a good explanation. We packed up and left that afternoon, drove back home, and that was that. But the memory stuck with us. A few weeks later, we were sitting around at someone's place talking about weird stories, strange things in the woods, local legends. One of us brought up regional cryptids, and we started looking up one from New Hampshire. That's when we came across mentions of something called the Wood Devil. The name sounded like something made up, but we kept reading. The descriptions were consistent. A tall, thin, pale creature. Human-shaped but silent, known for standing completely still, often along the tree line, watching. Usually seen in the north, mostly in Coos County. It blended in with birch trees and was said to freeze if spotted, so it wouldn't be noticed. It was always described as very fast when moving, but often just stood and watched. None of us had heard of it before. I didn't believe in stuff like that, still don't really. But it hit me when I saw those descriptions. The pale figure in the empty site that never moved, that I couldn't make sense of, and the scattered, glowing dots later that night. I don't know if they're connected. Could have been two completely separate things. One could have been a trick of the light, the other some weird natural phenomenon I don't understand. But something about it just sits wrong. I've been camping for years, all kinds of places. Forests, deserts, mountains. I know how the dark plays tricks on your eyes, how your brain tries to make sense of shapes and shadows. But this felt different. The figure wasn't shadowy. It was too clear. And the glowing dots weren't imagined. They were right there on the ground, visible to more than just me. We haven't been back to that part of New Hampshire since. We still talk about it now and then, usually when we're around a fire. No one ever tries to come up with an answer. We just leave it there, hanging between us. A night in the woods that didn't quite make sense and maybe never will. I grew up camping and off-roading in the desert canyons, the kind of places where you can't hear another soul for miles unless they're with you. It was a part of life for us. My grandparents owned a ranch out in the middle of nowhere, and after they passed, my parents took it over. We were all raised out there, learning early on how to handle being alone, how to live with no one to rely on but yourself and the people you came with. It wasn't about being paranoid. It was just the reality of where we lived. The nearest town was hours away. Cell service was spotty at best. When something went wrong, there wasn't a cop or ambulance coming to help. That meant we all learned to shoot and defend early. Even the youngest kids knew what to do in an emergency. That day, we had the whole family out in one of the more remote canyon areas that was legal for target practice. It was a wide, flat space surrounded by low, rocky hills. You had to go out of your way to find it. So we figured we'd be completely alone. 15 or 16 adults, maybe a dozen kids. All family. We brought tables, coolers, ammo cans, shade tents. Two long 6-foot folding tables were laid out, each covered in our guns. Rifles, pistols, shotguns, everything was legal, all registered, all handled with the kind of care that came from generations of experience. People would pick one up, try it out for a while, clean it, then swap for another. It was a calm, warm day, not hot yet, just dry and quiet except for the sound of occasional gunshots echoing off the rocks and the buzz of cicadas somewhere in the brush. The younger kids were under one of the tents, building forts out of stones and eating snacks. The teens were split between watching the shooting and helping reload. Some of the adults sat in folding chairs, just soaking in the sun. It felt like just another good family day in the desert. Then we saw the trucks. 2 of them, black and dusty, old body styles. They came in fast, bouncing over the rocky path like they didn't care about the suspension. We all stopped shooting as soon as they crested the ridge and started heading down into our clearing. Everyone went quiet. No one said anything, but we all felt it. Something was off. They didn't park like people coming to say hello. They pulled in side by side, noses out, blocking off the one exit we had. Not a friendly wave, not a hand out the window. Just parked front to front with our line of trucks, boxing us in. Doors popped open. 4 men got out of each truck, 8 total. Each one had a rifle or shotgun strapped over their shoulder. They weren't dressed for hiking or shooting or any kind of desert work. Baggy clothes, flashy sneakers, faces hidden by sunglasses or flat-billed hats. The way they moved didn't feel casual. It felt like they were walking into a place they thought was theirs now. But what they didn't expect was what they saw in return. Every adult in my family immediately stood up. No yelling, no panic. Everyone just moved with this quiet, practiced urgency. We've been raised for this. My dad picked up his rifle. My uncle unholstered a pistol from under his chair. I grabbed the 12 gauge off the corner of the table, checked the chamber out of habit, and stood with it at my side. Everyone else did the same. Pistols hung at people's hips. Rifles were held low, but ready. No one aimed unless they had to, but we made it clear we weren't unarmed or unprepared. Even the kids moved. The older ones, 12 to 17, got up from the shade and took their places without being told. The smaller kids were corralled behind the tailgate of one of the trucks, crouched low but out of sight. My little cousin, only 9, held a small .22 with both hands, his face pale, but his stance solid. My mom, who walks with canes because of her knees, dropped them to the ground, leaned on the table, and took the AR-15 someone handed her. She didn't hesitate. None of us did. There was a dead silence for a second. The men stopped where they were, halfway between their trucks and ours, clearly realizing they'd walked into a situation they weren't expecting. They looked at us. We looked at them. There were 15 of us standing, each armed, calm, quiet, and absolutely not backing down. I don't know what they were thinking, but the fear was visible in their faces. Maybe they thought they could scare a few unarmed campers. Maybe they didn't expect kids and grandparents to be standing there, ready to defend their people. Whatever plan they had fell apart in real time, right in front of us. None of them even reached for their weapons. They just slowly started backing up. One of them, probably the leader, leaned back into the truck cab and muttered something. Then he turned around, called out, "Sorry, wrong spot," and they all piled back in. Engines roared. Tires spit gravel. In seconds they were gone, tearing out of the canyon like they couldn't leave fast enough. We stood still for a long moment, watching the dust rise behind them. No one said anything until we heard the engines fade completely into the distance. My uncle and brother didn't waste time. They hopped on the quads, helmets on, and followed at a distance. They knew the desert better than anyone. They didn't have to tail them the whole way. They just needed to cut across the canyon and get to the road before those guys hit the highway. We kept everything calm on our end. A few people resumed shooting, others just sat down again like nothing had happened. But we were all a little more alert now. My dad got on the CB radio to talk to the guys on the quads, gave them direction. Eventually, my uncle called back. Once they hit cell signal near the edge of the range, they phoned it in. Police picked the trucks up at a gas station less than 20 minutes later. Turns out those guys were gang members, wanted for multiple other crimes. Armed robbery, assault. They had stolen weapons in the back of the trucks, and none of them were licensed to carry. One of them was already out on bail for a gun charge. They added a list of new ones to that day's tally. Unregistered firearms, intent to intimidate, unlawful entry to a controlled area. It could have gone very differently if we hadn't been who we were, if we'd hesitated, if we'd panicked, if we hadn't grown up knowing how to handle ourselves when no one else would come help. But we did. That night, after we finished up shooting and packed up the tables, we sat around a fire and talked about it. The older folks shared stories about other times people thought the desert was empty. The kids listened wide-eyed, still holding on to the lessons from the day. We laughed, but it wasn't lighthearted. It was the kind of laughter that comes after something heavy passes you by and doesn't stop. We never went out there unprepared, but that day reminded us why. That's the thing about growing up out here. You learn to stand your ground, not because you want trouble, but because if trouble finds you, you'd better be ready. We kept camping, kept shooting, kept spending time out in the canyons. Nothing changed, really, but we all paid a little more attention from then on. And those guys, they never came back. It was early March when I drove up to the family cabin in Colorado. We hadn't been there in almost 2 years. Life had gotten in the way. My daughter had started school, my wife had changed jobs, and I'd been working longer hours. The cabin sat up in the foothills, surrounded by pines and patchy snow, even in spring. We used to go up a few times every year, usually summer and fall. I had good memories there. Early mornings with coffee on the porch, elk in the distance, chopping firewood, and watching the stars. But this trip wasn't for relaxing. I went alone, just for the weekend, to check things out and make sure everything was okay before we brought the family up again. The road up was quiet. Still a bit of ice in the shaded spots, but manageable. The trees looked about the same, though a couple had fallen closer to the driveway. I parked, stepped out, and just stood there for a moment, looking at the cabin. Brown wood siding, black shingle roof, a single chimney on the east side. Nothing looked out of place from the outside. No broken panels, no obvious signs of animals. I walked up to the front door. It was still locked. I had to jiggle the key a little because the cold made the lock stick. When I finally got it open and stepped inside, everything smelled old. Dusty wood, stale air, a hint of mouse droppings. I turned on the lights. They flickered once and came on. The cabin had a main room with an old couch, a couple of armchairs, a fireplace, and a kitchen toward the back. 2 bedrooms and a bathroom were off the left side of the hallway. Everything looked untouched. I walked slowly through the living room. A couple of cobwebs in the corners, some dust on the furniture. I checked the cupboards, some old canned food, nothing new. No signs anyone had been here. I checked the bathroom. Nothing weird there either. No signs of animals nesting, no broken pipes. The master bedroom door was closed. I opened it and stood in the doorway for a second. The bed was made just like we'd left it. The room was cold. No drafts though. But one thing stopped me. The window on the far wall. It was shattered. There was a big hole in it, the glass all pushed outward. I stepped closer. The floor inside the room had glass shards scattered near the wall, but the bulk of it was outside. I opened the bedroom door to the yard and walked out to get a better look. Sure enough, the glass lay mostly outside in the dirt and pine needles. That was the first thing that didn't sit right with me. Windows break inward when something comes in. But this, it looked like someone or something had broken out. The glass was pushed out, not in. I stood there for a minute, trying to make sense of it. No branches near the window. No rocks or objects that could have flown through it. No footprints in the soft dirt, at least not fresh ones. I went back inside and really looked at the floor of the bedroom. The dust was thick enough that I could see a kind of trail, a wide smudge that started near the bed and led toward the hallway. Like something had been dragged. No shoe prints, no signs of struggle like scuff marks or blood, just this long smudge in the dust. It curved gently out of the bedroom, down the hallway, and stopped near the kitchen door. The kitchen itself looked normal. I opened every drawer, checked the sink, even opened the fridge, which was thankfully empty and clean. No food left to rot. The trail didn't go farther than the doorway. It just ended. I checked the whole house top to bottom again. No broken locks, no missing items. Everything was exactly how we left it, except for that one shattered window and that strange drag mark in the dust. I stepped outside again and walked the whole perimeter. The cabin's built on a concrete foundation, so nothing can crawl under it. The ground had patches of old snow and dead leaves, but I saw nothing that explained the window. No tire marks, no footprints, not even animal tracks nearby. The surrounding trees looked the same as always. I listened, but there were no birds, no wind, no movement at all. It was dead quiet. That night, I stayed, mostly because I didn't want to drive down in the dark. I set up my sleeping bag on the couch, lit a small fire in the fireplace, and tried to read. But my eyes kept drifting to the hallway. I kept thinking about that drag mark. I even checked it again before bed, hoping I'd imagined it. But it was still there, clear as day. I didn't sleep much. I woke up at every little creak, every shift of the wind. The old cabin makes noise anyway, but it felt different that night. Like something had happened there. Not something paranormal, just something bad. Something I wasn't supposed to know about. By morning, I made up my mind. I cleaned up the broken glass, swept away the dust trail as best I could, boarded up the broken window, and locked the place back up. I drove down the mountain without stopping. The whole way, I kept trying to rationalize it. Maybe an animal somehow got trapped inside, panicked, and crashed through the window to escape. Maybe it had dragged something, a bag of food, a blanket, across the floor. But there were no signs of any of that. Nothing torn, nothing chewed, no hair, no claw marks, no droppings. I thought about calling the local police. But what would I say? That a window broke from the inside and I saw a dusty trail on the floor? They'd think I was wasting their time. I thought about asking the neighbors, but the cabins on our road are spaced far apart. Most are vacation homes like ours and probably empty. When I got home, my wife asked how it went. I told her it was fine, just needed some cleaning. I didn't say anything about the window or the drag marks. I didn't want to scare her or worry my daughter. But that week I couldn't get out of my head. I kept playing it over and over. I started wondering who might have had a key. We hadn't changed the locks since my dad owned it. Maybe a maintenance guy, an old friend, the realtor we used years ago. But again, nothing was taken. Nothing was left behind. Just that one broken window and the drag marks in the dust. By the end of the month, I listed the cabin for sale. I didn't tell my wife the real reason. I said we weren't using it enough, that it made more sense to get something closer to home. She didn't argue. We found a buyer by spring. Some retired couple from Denver. They loved the view, the quiet, the fresh air. I handed over the keys without mentioning anything. I signed the papers, took the check, and didn't look back. Even now, I still don't know what happened in that cabin. I don't believe in ghosts or anything like that. But something did happen. Something that made someone or something break out. And that's enough for me. I've never gone back. I don't plan to. It was a last-minute thing, really. I was supposed to go on a camping trip with a few friends, but one by one they all backed out. I'd already taken the days off work and was dead set on getting out of the city. So I found this small cabin online, cheap, remote, and available for the weekend. It was about a 4-hour drive from where I lived, deep in a wooded area near a lake, far enough that I knew there wouldn't be anyone else around. The listing said it was rustic, had power, but no internet, and was originally a hunting lodge back in the 70s. That didn't bother me. In fact, I was looking forward to getting off-grid for a while. When I pulled up the long dirt driveway, branches scraped the sides of my car and the tires kicked up little clouds of dust. The cabin looked old but solid, with faded red paint on the outside and a metal roof that had rust creeping along the edges. The porch sagged a little in the middle, and the screen door hung crooked. Still, it was peaceful. The trees surrounded it completely, tall and quiet, and the lake peeked through the gaps just down a small hill behind the cabin. It was quiet, really quiet. No traffic sounds, no planes overhead, just the creaking of the trees and the occasional bird call. Inside, the place smelled of old wood and dust. The floors were uneven and creaked under every step. There was a little kitchen with old appliances, a wood-burning stove, and a narrow hallway leading to a single bedroom and a small bathroom. Everything was basic, bare minimum furniture, old curtains that barely covered the windows, mismatched dishes stacked on open shelves. But it was clean, at least clean enough. I unpacked, set my phone to airplane mode, and put in a drawer. I didn't want distractions. That first day, I hiked around the woods a bit, checked out the lake, and made myself a simple dinner. I went to bed early, and even though the mattress was lumpy and the sheets smelled a little like mildew, I slept hard. The second night was when I noticed something off. I had just gone to bed and was lying there in the dark, listening to the wind move through the trees when I heard what I thought was a thump. Just a single dull thud from somewhere in the cabin. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough that I noticed it right away. I froze, listening, but there was nothing after that. Just silence again. It didn't sit right with me. I got up, walked through the cabin with a flashlight, checked all the windows and doors. Everything was locked. Everything looked normal. I figured maybe something fell off a shelf, or maybe the old cabin was just settling. I went back to bed and told myself not to overthink it. The next morning, I saw something that really got under my skin. I went to get a mug from the kitchen shelf, and I noticed that one of the mugs that had been facing outwards the day before was now turned around. Not a big deal on its own, but I was certain I hadn't used that mug, and I'd barely touched anything in the kitchen since I got there. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I knocked it while reaching for something else. Still, it stuck with me all day. That evening, I decided to keep all the lights on, just in case. I stayed up later, reading by the wood stove. The wind picked up and started howling against the windows. The trees creaked and groaned in the dark. At around 11, the power cut out. All at once. No flickering, just off. The lights, the stove fan, everything went dead. My flashlight was on the table, but the batteries had been dying, and it was just a weak yellow circle of light. I sat there for a few minutes, trying to stay calm. Old places lose power, especially in the woods. But then I heard it again. That same thud. This time it came from the hallway. It was like someone dropped something heavy right outside the bedroom door. I sat perfectly still, listening. My heart was pounding. I was suddenly aware of every little sound in the cabin. The ticking of the cooling stove, the wind scraping branches against the outside walls, the faint hum of blood rushing in my ears. I waited, holding my breath. Nothing else. I grabbed the flashlight, moved slowly to the hallway, and looked around. There was nothing. No fallen object, no marks on the floor. But the bedroom door, which I always left open, was half closed. I hadn't touched it since I arrived. I opened it slowly and checked the room. It was empty. Still, something felt wrong. There was a pressure in the air, like the kind you feel before a storm. Heavy, tense. I barely slept that night. Every little creak or gust of wind had me wide awake. I left the flashlight on the whole time, afraid that the power might not come back and I'd be stuck in the dark again. In the morning, the lights were still out. I got dressed, packed up a bit, and figured I'd go into the nearest town to get batteries, maybe gas up the car, grab something decent to eat. On the way out, I passed by the shed next to the cabin. I hadn't looked inside it before, but now I was curious. The lock on it was broken, hanging loose, so I pulled open the door. Inside was an old workbench, a bunch of rusted tools, and boxes of random junk. But what made me stop was a stack of notebooks on a shelf. Water damaged, stained with age. I flipped through one, then another. They were journals. Someone had lived here before, and they'd written about their time in the cabin. The entries were messy, rambling, but few things stood out. One writer, a man named Alan, had stayed here alone off and on for years. His entries started normal, talking about fixing the roof, chopping wood, keeping mice out. Then they shifted. He started mentioning the noises at night, things being moved, seeing shadows where there shouldn't be any. He wrote about finding his tools out of place, the door closing on its own, food going missing. The last entry was short and scribbled like it was written in a hurry. It said, asterisk, something is wrong with this place. Not ghosts, not demons, just wrong. Like the air's twisted. I keep hearing it breathe when I sleep. Asterisk, that was it. Nothing after that. No dates, no goodbyes. Just silence. I left the shed feeling sick. It was too similar to what I'd experienced. I drove to town, got supplies, and seriously considered not going back to the cabin at all. But I didn't have anywhere else to stay, and I was too stubborn to cut the trip short. So I went back, told myself I'd keep all the lights on, keep the flashlight close, and leave early in the morning. That night was the worst. It started the same, quiet, wind in the trees, darkness pressing in from all sides. Around midnight, I heard the door creak. Not slam, just the slow, steady creak of it swinging open. I got out of bed, heart racing, flashlight shaking in my hand. I moved toward the main room and froze. The front door was wide open. I had locked it before bed, double-checked it, but now it stood open, letting in the cold air and the sound of the wind. I scanned the porch, the trees, the shadows. Nothing. I stepped outside, looked around the edges of the cabin, my breath fogging in front of me. No signs of anyone. No tracks. Nothing. I shut the door, locked it again, moved a chair in front of it for good measure, and stayed awake until sunrise. In the morning, I packed everything in the car and left. I didn't bother cleaning up, didn't leave a note for the owner, didn't even grab the food I had left in the fridge. I just wanted out. A week later, out of curiosity, I looked up the history of the cabin. There wasn't much, but I did find a short article from about 20 years ago. 2 hunters went missing in that area. Their truck was found near the same lake. Search parties came up empty. The cabin was listed for sale a few years later, cheap. It wasn't haunted. I still believe that. I don't believe in ghosts or demons, but I believe something about that place wasn't right. Whether it was isolation, the effect of silence and distance on the brain, or something more grounded but equally dangerous, like a past that left a stain, I don't know. But it didn't feel natural. It felt like that cabin didn't want people in it. I never went back. I deleted the listing from my bookmarks. I didn't tell my friends about it. But every now and then, I think about that journal in the shed and the sound of that door creaking open in the middle of the night, and I wonder if the next person who rents that place will leave as quickly as I did, or if they'll leave at all. I live on a couple of acres in rural Oregon. The house is small but solid, a one-story place with a big front porch and a view of trees in every direction. I keep my tools in a shed about 30 feet from the house, near the edge of the tree line. It's an old wooden structure, slightly leaning, with a tin roof and a heavy door that sticks unless you pull it just right. I use it to store everything: power tools, gas cans, spare lumber, all the odds and ends you need when you live this far out. That night, I went to bed around 11. It had been raining most of the afternoon, but by the time I shut off the lights, it was quiet outside, just the wind rustling through the trees and the steady drip of water from the gutters. I fell asleep pretty fast. Living out here, you get used to the silence. You rely on it. When something breaks that silence, it's impossible to ignore. I woke up just after 2 a.m. It wasn't any loud crash or sudden noise that got me up. It was more like a dull clatter, something light and metallic. At first I thought it was raccoons. They're always nosing around the trash bins or scurrying along the roof. I sat up, rubbed my face, and listened. The sound came again, clearer this time. Not on the roof. From outside. I got up, walked over to the window that faces the backyard, and looked out. The moon was low, but bright enough to make out shapes. I saw the silhouette of the shed clearly, and the door was open. It stopped me cold. I never leave that door open. It sticks when you try to close it, but once it's shut, it doesn't budge unless you really yank it. I stared at it for a few seconds, wondering if I had somehow left it ajar earlier, but I knew I hadn't even gone out there that day. I figured maybe it was the wind or an animal nosing it open. Still, something felt off. I grabbed my flashlight from the kitchen drawer, pulled on a jacket, and stepped outside. The air was damp and cold. My boots squished a little in the wet grass. I walked slowly, keeping the beam of my flashlight on the shed. The door swayed slightly, open just wide enough for someone to slip through. I don't know why, but I kept my steps quiet. I moved like I was trying not to wake someone up. When I got to the door, I paused. I could hear something, a faint scraping or shifting sound. I thought maybe something had knocked over a rake or a toolbox inside. I raised the flashlight, clicked it on, and swung the beam into the shed. The light passed over the shelves, the wall hooks, the workbench, and then a man stood up from behind the bench. I froze, just like that. My hand stayed on the flashlight, but I didn't move, didn't breathe. He was filthy. His face and hands were smudged with dirt and grease. He wore a tattered, dark green military-style jacket. His hair was long and matted, and in his right hand, he held a screwdriver. We locked eyes. He didn't say anything. He didn't yell or lunge. He just stared at me, breathing hard, then took one slow step toward me. That's all it took. I bolted. I didn't even think about it. I turned and ran full speed back to the house, slipping once in the wet grass, but catching myself. My heart was pounding so loud I couldn't hear anything else. I threw myself up the porch steps, slammed the door shut, locked it, then locked the deadbolt, then dragged the heavy coat rack in front of it just to be sure. I went around the house, double-checking every window, every door. Everything was locked, but I still kept looking. I couldn't stop shaking. Once I felt like I'd secured everything, I picked up the phone and called the sheriff's department. They said they'd send someone right away. The nearest unit was about 25 minutes out. I stood in the living room with the lights off, peeking through the front curtains, watching the backyard. I couldn't see the shed clearly from that angle, but I didn't want to move to another room. I kept thinking about that man's face, how blank it looked, how calm he was, even holding that screwdriver like it was just another tool in his hand. When the deputies finally showed up, they searched the shed first. I watched them walk around with flashlights, talking quietly to each other. Eventually, one of them came up to the porch and knocked. I let them in and told them everything. They didn't find the man. He was gone by the time they got there. But they found evidence that he'd been living in the shed for at least a week. There was a rolled-up sleeping bag tucked behind the workbench, several empty cans of beans, and soup stacked neatly in a corner, a plastic jug that had once held water, and something that chilled me more than anything else, a small, spiral-bound notebook. One of the deputies let me flip through it while they photographed everything. Most of the pages were filled with messy, uneven handwriting. Some of it was just rambling, nonsense sentences and scribbles. But then there were lines like, "The man gets up at 6:13, and he watched TV for 2 hours again, and he didn't lock the shed tonight." Entry after entry. Some days had multiple notes. Times. Descriptions of what lights I turned on, what door I'd walked out of, what jacket I'd worn to get the mail. He had been watching me, not just squatting in the shed, but studying me, tracking my habits, logging my movements. The deputies took the notebook with them. They dusted for fingerprints, walked the woods a bit, but they didn't find anything else that night. Before they left, they told me I should stay somewhere else for a couple of days, just to be safe. I packed a bag and drove to my brother's place an hour away before the sun came up. Over the next few days, the sheriff's office patrolled the area, but they never found him. No prints, no footprints, no signs of where he went. Just gone, like he vanished into the trees. I replaced the lock on the shed and installed motion lights around the property. I put cameras on the porch, on the driveway, even one in the shed. I haven't seen anyone since, but I still check the footage every night. I still wake up sometimes at 2 or 3 a.m. for no reason. I lie there in bed, listening to the wind, watching the shadows move across the ceiling. I always look toward the window, wondering if he's out there, waiting. It's been months now and nothing's happened, but I don't think I'll ever sleep the same way again, knowing someone was that close for that long. Watching me while I went about my life, completely unaware, it changes how you feel about your own home. It doesn't matter how many locks you have. Once someone's been inside your space, once they've claimed even a little piece of it, it's hard to ever feel like it's fully yours again. I was out on some BLM land, hunting jackrabbits and quail a little ways past where the scrubland fades and the terrain starts getting chewed up by the edge of quarry. That whole area is weird. Empty, silent, dry, with dirt roads that look like no one's driven on them in months, but still have a few fresh tire tracks now and then. I parked maybe a quarter mile from this dry stream bed that cut through the brush and headed east toward the fencing around the quarry property. The place always felt off, not haunted or anything, just like somewhere you shouldn't spend more time than you have to. But the game was decent, and I've been there a few times already. The jackrabbits would dart out of the mesquite and sage, and you could flush quail from the lower brush along the dry channels. That day it was warmer than I expected. It was supposed to stay cool and dry, but the sun came out stronger than the forecast said, and the air just sort of hung heavy over everything. I was walking the edge of the dry stream, looking for signs of movement, when I saw a couple of fresh rabbit tracks cutting across what looked like slightly damp dirt. Not wet, just darker and more packed than the dust around it. It looked solid enough, like the crusted over remnants of a little water runoff, the kind you see after a short rain. I started across it without really thinking. It wasn't like it was deep, just 15 feet wide, maybe a low dip in the terrain. I'd taken maybe 6 or 7 steps when my right foot sort of gave way beneath me. The dirt shifted with a soft crunch and then let go like I'd stepped on a soggy sponge with a thin layer of crust over it. I didn't panic right away, just figured it was a soft patch. I tried to step forward and plant my left foot, but that one sank too. And before I could react, the ground sort of caved beneath me, and I dropped fast, the dirt turning into this cold, thick mud that wrapped around my legs like it was alive. I dropped to my knees, and the mud went with me. It wasn't loose or watery. It was sticky and dense like wet cement. My boots were already deep, and when I tried to shift my weight to pull one foot free, it felt like it was vacuum sealed in place. I could feel the mud tightening when I moved, like every twitch just pulled me deeper. My thighs were sinking, slow but steady, like something was pulling me down from below. I froze for a second, realizing that this wasn't just soft ground. This was bad. Real bad. I dropped my shotgun to the side and leaned back as far as I could, throwing my arms out wide, trying to spread my weight. My mind just went into survival mode. I flattened out on my back, upper body resting on the dry dirt around the edge of the sink. My legs stayed stuck, bent into the hole like I'd fallen into a trap. The sun felt way too hot on my face, but I didn't dare move much. Every shift caused a slurp from below, and I felt another inch give. It was like the earth didn't want to let go. I took a few seconds to calm myself down and think it through. My chest was pounding. I wasn't screaming or anything. There was no one around to hear anyway, but I was breathing hard and fast. I reached down slowly and started digging around my left leg, trying to create space and loosen the mud's grip. I could barely get my hands into the thick stuff. It clung to my skin and closed like glue. I tried pulling my left leg up, but it wouldn't move. It felt like trying to lift a car. My right leg was even worse, deeper in and twisted just enough to hurt. I didn't know how long I'd been there. 10 minutes, 20, no idea. Time kind of stopped. I rested, tried again, rested again. I fought like hell, twisting gently, digging with my hands, using any little leverage I could get with my arms and back. At one point, I tried just screaming out of frustration, just to release something, but it didn't help. Eventually, after what felt like hours, it got a little movement in my left leg. I felt something shift. That tiny motion gave me just enough hope to keep going. I worked it slowly, side to side, and finally the suction gave out with a loud slurp. The release nearly made me fall forward again, but I managed to stay laid out. The right leg was harder. My sock and boot had shifted down from all the pulling, and the mud had poured into the space like cement. It was cold and raw. My muscles burned from trying to bend at such an awkward angle for so long. But I just kept at it little by little, pulling, twisting, letting the suction break millimeter by millimeter. I felt tears leaking out of my eyes. Not from pain exactly, just from exhaustion and panic catching up with me. Eventually, with one final jerk and a full body heave that made my back cramp up, my right leg popped free. I didn't even really climb out. I just kind of flopped and rolled like a wounded animal back on a solid ground, gasping like I just swum to shore from drowning. I laid there for probably 5 or 10 minutes, staring at the sky, coated in mud up to my chest, breathing like I'd run 10 miles. My hands were shaking. I had no idea what time it was. The mud was starting to dry on my clothes, making them heavy and stiff. I sat up, wiped the worst of it off, and grabbed my shotgun, which was somehow still laying to the side, half covered in dirt. My legs felt like jelly. Every muscle in my body was either sore or twitching. I stood up slowly and started limping back toward the car. The ground around me felt less stable now, like I couldn't trust anything I stepped on. I took the long way around every dip and hollow from then on. By the time I saw my car, the sun was lower in the sky. The shadows were long and the wind had picked up a little. I remember feeling a weird relief, like I just escaped something bigger than I could name. But that relief died when I got close and noticed the driver's side door wasn't fully closed. At first I thought maybe I'd just forgotten to lock it, but when I got closer, I saw the window was smashed in. Glass was all over the seat and ground. I stood there staring at it for a few seconds, then looked around, half expecting someone to pop out from behind the bushes. But there was no one, just silence. They'd taken my pack from the back seat, food, water, wallet, everything. I always kept my phone in my chest pocket, so I still had that. But they left the car stereo and even left a full box of shells in the trunk. It didn't look like they were looking for money. Just fast, random, careless. I guess I should have felt lucky they weren't still around, or that they hadn't messed with my tires or stolen the whole car. I sat down on the ground beside the car and just stayed there for a while, legs shaking, trying to process everything. Almost got swallowed by the ground, then came back to a busted car and someone rifling through my stuff like I didn't matter. The whole day felt unreal. I drove home with both windows down because of the broken glass, coated in dried mud, sweating, exhausted, and still half in shock. I didn't stop anywhere on the way, just drove straight back, hit the shower, and collapsed into bed. Looking back on it now, I don't know what kind of mud that was. Maybe there was an underground spring or old runoff from the quarry operations that made the ground soft in just the right spot. I've been in soft mud before, but never anything that deep and sudden. I don't know if whoever broke into my car was watching me or just stumbled on it while I was out of sight. Either way, I haven't been back there since. That patch of land felt like it didn't want me there, and I don't think I'd win a second time. The rain had been falling for almost 2 full days by the time the last night rolled around. Not the kind of gentle, pattering rain that can feel peaceful when you're out in the woods, but a non-stop, hard, soaking rain that felt like it was trying to wash everything off the face of the earth. Everything was wet. Every bit of firewood was soaked. Every piece of clothing was damp. Every corner of our tent was dripping or slick. The air smelled like mud and rotting leaves and mildew. We were tent camping in southern Ohio, deep in one of the more remote parks, just trying to get through the final night of what had started as a fun family trip. My daughters were asleep in their sleeping bags beside us, curled up and shivering in their sleep. My wife, who was 6 months pregnant at the time, lay next to me quietly, trying her best to rest, though neither of us really could. We had pulled our tent up onto a higher, flatter bit of ground surrounded by large trees when we'd first arrived, thinking it would keep us dry if it rained. And for the most part, it did. But after 48 hours of nonstop water pounding down, even the best ground turns to mush. The tree roots around us had started looking exposed. Small rivulets of water were constantly running under the rainfly and soaking the underside of the tent. We had laid down plastic sheeting beneath us, but even that couldn't keep the wet from seeping into everything. We'd eaten cold food all day because the fire wouldn't catch, no matter how much lighter fluid I wasted on it. It was too wet to even sit outside, so the 4 of us had just been cooped up in the tent, reading, playing cards, and trying to keep the kids from getting stir crazy. It was miserable, but we were holding on. I kept telling myself we only had to make it one more night. Just get through this last stretch, and we'd pack up in the morning and head back to dry clothes, hot showers, and real food. I must have drifted off sometime after midnight. I was on edge and uncomfortable, but my body gave out after 2 rough nights. When it happened, it was like the ground itself cracked open. The sound was enormous, like thunder but lower and angrier. At first I thought it was thunder, maybe a lightning strike nearby. The tent shook violently, and then it felt like the whole world caved in on top of us. A massive weight crushed down the center of the tent. The canvas collapsed over us instantly. The sound of ripping fabric, splitting wood, and shattering glass hit all at once, mixed with screams. I couldn't even move at first. There was something hard pressing down on my back, pinning my chest into the ground. My face was smashed into my sleeping bag, and I couldn't lift my head. For a few terrifying seconds, I couldn't breathe. It felt like the air was being squeezed out of me. Then I realized what had happened. A tree, one of those massive oak trees, easily 80 or 90 feet tall, had come down right on top of us. The ground must have gotten so waterlogged that the roots just gave up. The force of it coming down was enough to flatten the tent, crush my Jeep parked a few feet away, and roll enough to pin the entire center of our campsite. I couldn't even process it right away. All I could hear was the pounding of rain still falling on the broken tent canvas and my own heart thundering in my ears. I shifted slowly, testing where the weight was. My right leg was stuck under something heavy, probably a limb, but my upper body was mostly free after a bit of struggling. My hands were shaking as I forced myself to move inch by inch. My mind was racing. I didn't know if my wife was okay. I didn't know if the girls were okay. The idea that they could have been crushed right next to me and I wouldn't have been able to stop it, it tore something in me. I pushed, pulled, clawed at the broken canvas and tree bark until I could sit up. The rain was still coming down hard, but I could see through a tear in the tent that the tree was huge, easily 5 feet wide at the base, and it had split into a dozen massive branches when it fell. Some had shattered against the ground. Others rested on top of what was left of the Jeep, but one thick branch, maybe as thick as my torso, had rolled across the middle of our tent. That's what had pinned us. I could hear my wife making a sound. It wasn't a scream, more like a strained moan. That got me moving faster. I found her maybe 2 feet away, curled on her side, her lower body trapped under the same massive branch. Her face was pale, and she was shaking. I shouted for her, but she didn't respond, just stared at me, eyes wide with pain and fear. I crawled to her, ignoring the sharp pains in my ribs and hip. My hands were numb, and I couldn't get a good grip on the tree limb at first. I tried everything. I used a broken piece of the tent pole as a lever. I pushed with both hands. I screamed out loud as I strained to move it. Inch by inch, it shifted. Eventually, with one final shove, I managed to roll it just far enough to pull her free. Her left leg was twisted at a strange angle, and she couldn't put weight on it, but she was conscious and able to move. Next were the girls. They had been sleeping toward the other end of the tent, farther from the impact. I crawled through the broken, soaked mess of sleeping bags and ripped nylon until I found them. Both were huddled under a collapsed part of the tent, soaked and shaking, but alive. One had a cut on her forehead, the other was screaming and clutching her arm. I pulled them out, one by one, dragging them carefully into the open air. I kept saying over and over, you're okay, but I don't even know if they could hear me over the rain and their own cries. Once we were all out from under the wreckage, I helped my wife sit against a tree stump and wrapped her in whatever dry layer I could find. The girls clung to her while I stumbled through the dark to check the Jeep. It was crushed. The roof was completely flattened, the windshield blown out. If any of us had been inside when it fell, we would have been killed instantly. Seeing it like that made me realize just how close we came. We could have all died that night easily. No warning, no second chances. I grabbed our emergency kit that had been stored in a side compartment, miraculously untouched, and used the first aid supplies to clean my daughter's wounds. My older daughter had a broken arm. My wife's ankle was definitely broken too, but we were all breathing. We were all talking. We were all alive. As the sun started to come up hours later, the rain finally began to let up. The forest was destroyed in places, branches, broken trees, flooded ground. But it was also quiet in a way that felt heavy. I managed to flag down help with the emergency whistle and a tarp I hung on a broken limb near the road we'd driven it on. A ranger came down about an hour later and called for help. They had to send an off-road ambulance in to get my wife out, and later told us it was the worst tree fall accident they'd seen in years that hadn't ended in a fatality. We spent a couple nights in the hospital. The girls were banged up, but fine. My wife's ankle needed surgery, but the baby was okay. Somehow, against all odds, he was perfectly fine. Strong heartbeat, no complications. A few months later, he was born healthy and perfect. We named him Oakley. I think about that night more often than I'd like to admit. Not because of the fear, but because of how close we came to losing everything. The tent, the Jeep, the gear, none of that mattered. We walked away, broken and bruised, but alive. That tree could have ended us, but it didn't. We got out. We held on. We survived. And I will never, ever camp near big trees again. It was a Thursday evening when I decided to take a different route home from work. I've been working overtime for weeks, and everything felt routine and stale. Same desk, same streets, same box dinner reheated in the microwave. I just wanted to change, something different to break the dull rhythm. I didn't plan anything specific, just started driving without turning the GPS on, letting my instincts guide me. The sun was already dipping below the rooftops, and the sky was fading into that deep blue right before nightfall. I turned onto a road I hadn't taken before, not too far from the city, but unfamiliar. It was narrow, not well paved, with patches of gravel and dips in the road that made the steering wheel tug in my hands. The houses were spaced far apart and looked older, like they hadn't been renovated in decades. Some were boarded up, some had peeling paint, but a few were still lived in, judging by the porch lights and the occasional car in a driveway. I kept driving, a little aimlessly, letting the road take me wherever. After about 10 minutes, the houses disappeared and gave way to empty lots and patches of trees. There were no streetlights now. My headlights cast long shadows across the road, and the only sound was the low hum of my car engine and the occasional crunch of loose rocks under the tires. I wasn't scared or anything, just distracted, a little zoned out. Then I saw something weird. Up ahead on the right, just at the edge where the trees started to get thick, there was a car pulled halfway off the road. Its hazard lights were on, blinking slow and steady in the dark. I slowed down. The car wasn't wrecked or anything. No dents, no broken glass. Just parked badly with the front angled into the brush. The driver's door was open and the inside light was on. No one was in the front seat. I pulled up beside it, my windows rolled up, trying to see if anyone was around. I didn't hear anything. No voices, no footsteps. Just those blinking lights and the steady ticking of my own engine cooling. I didn't want to get out, but something about the way that car was just sitting there with the door open, it made me uneasy. It felt wrong. I thought maybe someone had gotten hurt, maybe wandered off into the trees for help. But still, I just sat there, staring at it. A few seconds later, I noticed the driver's seat was pushed far back, like really far, further than a normal person would need. And there was something on the floor, like a jacket or maybe a blanket. I leaned forward, squinting through the window, and realized it was a backpack. It looked full, like whoever left it behind was carrying everything they had. I didn't want to get involved. My gut told me to just back up, turn around, and forget it. But there was this part of me, this stupid part, that didn't want to ignore someone who might actually need help. I took my phone, turned on a flashlight, and opened my door. The air outside was cool and quiet. No wind, just the hum of the blinking hazards. I approached the car, keeping my eyes on the woods. It was thick, dense undergrowth and trees packed tightly together. If someone had gone in there, they wouldn't be easy to find. I stepped up to the driver's side and glanced in. The backpack was torn open at the top, like someone had rifled through it in a hurry. There were snack wrappers, a bottle of water, and a cheap-looking phone charger tangled in the mess. No wallet, no phone. I called out once, just a short, loud, "Hey," but no one answered. No sound came back at all. I backed away from the car, flashlight pointed at the ground, and considered calling the police. But what would I say? There's an empty car on a rural road, and someone might have walked into the woods. They probably wouldn't do much. I looked at the trees again, just a solid wall of black branches and shadows. I started feeling like someone was watching, even though I couldn't see anyone. I turned around to head back to my own car when I heard something. A rustle, off to the left. Not like a squirrel or a bird. This was heavier. Several steps, moving quickly but not running. I froze. My flashlight caught nothing but bark and underbrush, but the sound had definitely been footsteps. I backed up, slow, my shoes crunching on the gravel. I couldn't see anyone, but I felt something shift. Like whoever was out there knew I was there now. My stomach dropped. I turned and walked fast back to my car, not quite running, but close. As I reached for the door, I heard it again. Footsteps. Closer. Faster. I yanked open the door, slid into the seat, and locked it behind me. My heart was pounding. I turned the key and floored it, headlights washing over the other car and the trees beyond it. For a brief moment, I thought I saw something in the woods, just a shape, like a figure, but it was gone too fast to be sure. I drove like hell, not looking back, not caring if the road dipped or cracked. I just wanted out of there. When I finally reached the main road again, I pulled over at a gas station, parked under the lights, and sat there for a while. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't call the cops. I just sat there, heart still pounding, thinking about that car and whoever had been out there. A few days later, I looked up the area online, tried to find something: missing person reports, abandoned vehicle notices. There was nothing. No news stories, no police bulletins, just dead silence, like it never happened. But that wasn't the end of it. A week later, I started noticing weird things around my apartment. The first time, I found my front door unlocked when I came home from work. I was sure I'd locked it. I always did. Then, 2 nights later, I heard something in the hallway at around 2 in the morning. Not in the apartment, just outside. Slow, soft steps. I got up and looked through the peephole, but no one was there. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. Still nothing. When I opened the door and checked the hallway, there was no one, but I swear the air felt colder than it should have. I didn't sleep well after that. Every creak, every sound made me jump. I changed my locks the next morning, put up a cheap security camera outside my door, and for a while, things settled down. Until about 2 weeks later, when I checked the footage one morning. At 3:16 a.m., the camera caught someone standing at my door. They weren't doing anything, just standing there, not moving, no knocking, just standing. The figure was wearing a hoodie with the hood up, jeans, and dark shoes. I couldn't see a face. They stood there for almost 2 full minutes, then turned and walked away without a word. I called the police that time, filed a report. They said they'd keep an eye on the area, but there wasn't much they could do since nothing was stolen and no one broke in. Since then, nothing else has happened, but I still feel like I'm being watched sometimes. When I leave work late, I glance around the parking lot. I change my routes home. I keep my blinds closed now, always. And that random drive I took, I never did it again. I can't explain who was out there that night, or why that car was just left like that. I don't know if the person at my door was the same one from the woods. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe someone else stumbled onto the same road and didn't like that I'd seen too much. I don't know. And honestly, I don't think I want to know. What I do know is that I was just looking for something different that night. A break in routine. Something random. And I got it. But follow me home. I think I was about 11 the last time Mom took us camping. It had become a yearly thing ever since Dad left, a way to get out of the house, away from the noise of life, and into something simpler. She'd bought this old truck bed camper off a neighbor the year before. It was one of those square, boxy kinds that slide into the back of a pickup and rest on 4 spindly metal legs when it's off the truck. No slide outs, no fancy amenities, just a couple of bunks, a table that folded into another bed, and a tiny little stove that didn't work half the time. Still, it was ours, and we made do. That year, we went to a state campground we'd been to before. It wasn't exactly deep wilderness, but it felt like it to me at that age. The campsites were spaced far enough apart that you could forget other people were there, especially at night when the fires were out and everything went dark. We had a nice spot tucked in among some pines with a little view of a pond through the trees. I remember that detail because earlier that day, I'd watched a blue heron stand still as a statue before spearing a fish so quick I almost missed it. That kind of thing stays with you when you're a kid. The camper had already been leveled out when we arrived. Mom had gotten good at setting it up solo. I remember how the thin metal legs creaked under the weight as she cranked them down. I crawled inside to set up my sleeping bag on the upper bunk over the cab section while she lit a citronella candle on the picnic table and started dinner. It had been hot that day, humid and sticky, with thick clouds rolling in as the sun went down. I remember the air felt off, heavy, like it was pressing down on us. Even the usual buzz of bugs in the trees had gone quiet by dusk. We ate quick that night, hot dogs and beans. There was a strange restlessness in Mom I couldn't place then, but looking back, I think she felt it too. The tension in the air, the way everything around us seemed to be holding its breath. She turned in earlier than usual, didn't even bother reading like she normally would. I climbed up to my bunk, but I couldn't sleep. The wind had started to pick up, first in little bursts like it was testing its strength, then longer and louder. Around midnight, I woke up to the camper shifting under me. It wasn't a violent shake, more like a subtle, swaying motion, like standing on the deck of a boat. That alone was enough to wake me. But what kept me from calling out was the look on Mom's face. She was sitting upright on her bed, her back stiff and her hands gripping her knees. Her eyes weren't darting around in panic. They were locked on the wall like she was listening hard. Her face wasn't afraid exactly, but it was tight. Focused. I sat up quietly, not wanting to make any sudden noise. The wind was louder now, constant, howling like it was angry. The walls of the camper groaned, and the metal legs creaked with every gust. Rain had started tapping against the roof like little pellets. I don't know why I whispered. Maybe I didn't want to break the strange stillness in the camper. I just said, "Tornado." She didn't speak. She only nodded once, slowly. I didn't say anything else. I just sat there, heart thumping, ears straining to hear more than just the wind and rain. Then I heard it. It was faint at first, almost masked by the storm, but it grew louder and clearer as the minutes passed. A deep, constant rumble. Not thunder. It was too steady, too low. It didn't roll across the sky. It just stayed, growing louder like a freight train coming closer. That's what they say tornadoes sound like. A train barreling toward you. And sitting there inside that flimsy box balanced on 4 spindly legs, that's exactly what it felt like. My insides felt hollow. My hands were sweating and my mouth was dry, but I didn't move. Mom didn't either. We just sat there and listened. The camper was shaking now, not wildly, but enough that I could feel the bunk vibrating beneath me. The wind had taken on a kind of shrieking edge, a high-pitched sound layered on top of the growl. It didn't last long, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, but in that time it felt like the world outside had come unhinged. Then just as suddenly as it came, it faded. The sound of the train passed, leaving only the steady patter of rain and the lower whine of wind in its wake. The camper stopped shaking. The silence after was deafening. We didn't say a word. I just lay back down, my heart still pounding. Mom stayed sitting for a long while before finally lying back herself. I don't think either of us really slept after that. By morning, the sky was dull gray and the campground was a mess. Branches scattered everywhere, leaves plastered to cars and tents, mud tracked across the gravel roads. The air smelled like wet earth and pine needles. It was strangely quiet for how many people were there. We found out just how close it had come while walking to the bathroom building, which had a bulletin board by the front with park updates and weather alerts. A few people were gathered around talking. A couple of small trailers down on the lower end of the campground had been tipped over, not smashed or mangled, but just knocked onto their sides like toys. People were out, trying to upright them, checking on their gear, trying to keep kids calm. What hit hardest was what happened to the Girl Scout troop. They had been camping in tents over by the clearing near the creek. The tornado, or whatever edge of it clipped the park, had rolled right through their area. It had picked up their tents with the girls still inside. Not far, just 3 or 5 feet off the ground, but enough to terrify them and completely collapse their tents when they came back down. A park ranger had helped them gather up and move into the bathroom building for the night. It was one of those older concrete facilities with a dozen stalls and showers, the kind that echo when you walk. It had held all of them, their leaders, and their gear, and they stayed there huddled on the floor till sunrise. They looked shaken but safe, wrapped in blankets, and sipping from thermoses when we passed by. Back at our site, the camper had held. The legs were still steady, though one had sunk an inch deeper into the soft ground. Mom walked around it slowly, pressing her palm to the sides, testing it. I helped her check the insides, and aside from some condensation around the windows, everything was dry. No damage. She didn't say much that morning. We packed up slowly, not rushed, but with purpose. When we got back in the truck, the camper secured tight in the bed where it belonged. She finally said something, just a soft, almost distracted, "That's it. We're done." And we were. We never camped again after that. We still took trips, cabins, motels, sometimes even lodges near parks, but no more campgrounds, no more tents, no more campers. I don't blame her. I remember that night more clearly than I do most things from that age. Not because something terrible happened to us, but because of what could have. We were lucky, luckier than a lot of others. But when you're sitting in a metal box on spindly legs, listening to the sound of a tornado clawing its way through the dark, luck doesn't feel like enough. It just feels like a warning. Last summer, two close friends and I went camping deep in the Colorado backcountry. We were all from Denver and had spent a lot of time hiking and camping before, but this was our first time going so far off-grid. We planned the trip for weeks. We wanted real solitude, no cell signal, no other people, just us, the forest, and the stars. We picked a spot far from the regular campsites, using topo maps and GPS to find a flat patch near a small creek a few miles off a Forest Service road. It took most of the day to get there with our packs, and by the time we set up camp, the sun was already starting to dip behind the trees. We pitched two tents about 10 feet apart, one for me, one shared by the other two. There was a stone fire ring someone had built long before we came. We used it to cook a simple dinner over the portable stove, just pasta and canned sauce. We didn't bother lighting a fire. Too dry, too much work, and we were too tired. The air was still and silent except for the occasional rustle in the trees or the sound of water from the creek. We ate, talked quietly, then settled into our tents around 10 p.m. It got cold quickly once the sun disappeared. I lay in my sleeping bag, eyes open, listening to the forest breathe around us. At first, it was peaceful. Then, sometime after midnight, I started noticing a sound that didn't quite fit. It was faint, almost buried beneath the wind, but it wasn't the wind. It sounded like whispering, not talking, whispering. So soft it could have been leaves brushing each other, but there was something deliberate about it, like it had a rhythm. It wasn't right. I told myself I was just being paranoid. When you're that far out in the woods, your brain starts making things up. Every creak sounds like a person. Every gust feels like footsteps. I closed my eyes and tried to ignore it. Around 3 a.m., I heard my friend's tent zipper slowly open. At first, I thought one of them was just getting up to pee, but then I heard footsteps approach my tent and one of them whisper my name. I opened the flap just enough to see his face. His eyes were wide, his face pale, and he barely moved his lips when he said, "There's someone sitting by the fire." I sat up slowly. My heart was thudding. I didn't understand at first. We hadn't lit a fire, but I could see from the opening in my tent that someone was crouched next to the stone fire ring, just squatting, still as stone, no fire, just sitting there almost like he was waiting for something. I got out quietly and knelt beside my friend. We both stared. It wasn't a trick of the light. There was a man crouched low by the stones, elbows resting on his knees, head tilted slightly. He wasn't doing anything, just watching our tents. We couldn't see his face well, but we could make out his shape in the moonlight filtering through the trees. He wasn't moving, not even fidgeting. We backed away slowly and ducked into the other tent to get our third friend up. No one said anything. No one needed to. We packed as quickly and quietly as we could, shoving sleeping bags, food, and whatever gear we could reach into our packs without turning on a light. We left the tents and anything bulky behind. The whole time, we kept glancing toward the fire ring. He hadn't moved. He didn't try to come closer. He just sat there like a statue. When we started walking, we didn't take the trail. We cut straight through the trees. It was risky in the dark, but we didn't want to get close to him. We used one small headlamp with the red light on, just enough to avoid tripping. The forest was thick, and every branch that cracked under our feet sounded deafening. I kept expecting to hear footsteps behind us, but all I heard was our own labored breathing and the occasional birds startled out of sleep. We hiked for about an hour before we found the dirt road. We didn't stop. We kept walking another 4 miles to where we had left the truck. The second we reached it, we threw our packs in the bed, got in, and drove. No one said anything until we were halfway down the mountain. We got to the ranger station around dawn. One of the rangers was just starting his shift. We told him what happened. We explained where we had camped and described the man we saw. We said we didn't confront him, didn't talk to him, just saw him sitting there and left. The ranger took it seriously. He wrote everything down and said he'd send someone to check the site. That was the last we heard of it until next day. He called to let us know they'd gone out there, but didn't find anyone. No sign of anyone. In fact, except for our gear and tents still at the site. No footprints, no dropped items, nothing. He asked if we might have imagined it, or if maybe someone from another campsite wandered over and got lost. But there were no other campsites. Not for miles. That was the whole reason we picked that place. And we all saw the same thing. A man, sitting where we hadn't lit a fire, just staring. We've all been camping since then, but never that deep again. I still think about it sometimes. Who he was, what he wanted, and how long he had been there before we noticed him. I don't know if he followed us in the woods, or if he had been watching us all night. Maybe he was just some drifter or someone who'd lost their mind living out there alone. But the way he just crouched there in the dark without a fire, saying nothing, doing nothing, it didn't feel like an accident. It felt like he wanted us to know he was there. That image of him crouched by the fire ring, still as stone, is stuck in my mind. I don't think it'll ever go away. It was late, around 1:45 in the morning, and I was getting ready to close up the small gas station where I work night shifts. I've been working there for a few months, part-time while going through school. The place sat just off a quiet stretch of highway, a good 20 minutes from the next nearest building in either direction. On most nights, it was dead silent by midnight. Maybe 1 or 2 cars an hour would pull in, but otherwise it was just me, the buzzing of the lights, and the hum of the fridges. We had one restroom in the place, unisex for customers. I always made a round before locking up. Checked the aisles, locked the beer fridge, counted the drawer, and last thing, I always checked the restroom. It was routine. I'd clean it if needed, make sure it was empty, flip off the lights, and that was it. That night, I walked toward the back where the restroom was and noticed the door was open just a crack. Not wide, just enough that you could see the fluorescent light was still on inside. I don't know why, but something about that door being open like that made me stop for a second. Usually it was either fully shut or wide open, but this looked like someone had left it open just enough to slip back in. I pushed it open slowly, half expecting to smell something terrible or see a mess someone had left. But everything looked normal, clean, quiet, and still. Except for one thing. The stall door inside was shut, and I could see the little lock bolt had been slid shut from the inside. I stopped just outside the stall and waited. I knocked once. No answer. I waited again, then knocked a little harder. Still nothing. I was tired, a little irritated. I didn't want to be dealing with some passed out junkie or a prank or whatever this was. But I also didn't want to leave someone inside, locked up all night. So I got down on one knee, tilted my head, and looked under the stall. No feet, just the dull gray floor, the edge of the toilet, and the wall. No shadow, no shoes, no sound. Just nothing. It made my skin crawl a bit. I stood up, just staring at the locked stall for a while. I couldn't make sense of it. How was it locked if no one was in there? I went out front, behind the counter, and grabbed the restroom key. It had a stupidly big plastic tag attached to it. Some old piece of wood that made it impossible to forget. I walked back, unlocked the stall, and slowly pulled the door open. Inside was a backpack, a phone lying face down on the toilet tank, and a small folding knife, open, sitting on the toilet seat. The toilet lid was down, and everything looked deliberately placed. Not dropped, not forgotten, placed. The backpack looked new, black with red trim. No logos. I didn't touch it. I backed up a step, still staring at the setup. It looked like someone had been sitting there a few minutes ago and just vanished. But nothing made sense. Where did they go? There were no windows in the bathroom, no ceiling tiles to push up, nothing. The walls were solid concrete on 3 sides. The door was metal. One way in and out. I turned to leave, and that's when I realized the bathroom door behind me was completely shut. I hadn't heard it close. I hadn't even seen it move. I stepped forward and tried to open it. It wasn't locked. It opened easily. But something about it being closed like that, quiet and smooth, without me noticing, got under my skin. I walked straight out, locked the door behind me, and called the non-emergency police line. I wasn't about to deal with this alone. They showed up maybe 30 minutes later. 2 deputies. I let them in, showed them the bathroom, explained everything. They opened the bag. It had clothes inside, maybe 2 t-shirts, some jeans, and a pair of socks. The phone was dead. Cheap Android. The knife wasn't bloody, wasn't strange, just a regular folding knife. But still, the whole scene felt off. They asked if I'd seen anyone go in. I told them no. I'd been behind the counter for the past few hours. I checked the register times. I hadn't rung anyone up since about 11:20 p.m. The only car that had pulled in after that was a truck that just got gas and left. The cops took the bag and the phone. They asked for the security footage. I gave them access to the system. It wasn't a great setup. 2 outdoor cameras, one over the door, one pointed at the lot, and one inside pointed at the counter and the back hall that led to the restroom. The next day, the morning manager called me. She said they checked the footage and something didn't add up. I went in early just to see it myself. We pulled up the timestamp between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. Nothing unusual at first. At around 11:08 p.m., someone came in. A man in a dark hoodie and jeans. Couldn't see his face clearly. He walked straight back toward the restroom. Never looked at the shelves. Never came to the counter. Just walked in like he knew exactly where he was going. He never came out. We scrubbed through the next 3 hours of footage frame by frame. Nobody else entered or exited the bathroom. And there was no way to leave out the back. It wasn't that kind of place. Just 4 walls and 1 public entrance. We checked the outdoor camera too. Nothing. He went in. Never came out. The manager called the deputies again, and they came back out, but there wasn't much they could do. The guy wasn't reported missing. The phone was a burner, no SIM card. The bag had no ID. Nothing to go on. They asked a few local places if anyone had seen him, but no one had. After a couple of weeks, they stopped following up. For a while after that, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I cleaned the restroom, I glanced at that stall, half expecting to see that same scene again. Every time I looked in the mirror, I checked behind me, even though I knew how irrational that was. Eventually, I quit that job. Got something in town, closer to people, more lights, less empty space. But I still think about that night. I still think about how that stall was locked from the inside, how someone had been in there, how their stuff was left behind like they were coming back, how the only door in that building had never opened after they walked in. And I think about how quiet that door was when it closed behind me. How smooth, how I hadn't noticed until I turned around. I'll never work another night shift again. Not after that. My friend Jake invited me to his family's cabin out in the Montana woods for a long weekend. He said it had been in his family for decades, a kind of rustic getaway that no one used much anymore. I had just gotten off a rough couple of weeks at work and needed a break, so I said yes without asking many questions. He mentioned it was remote, but I didn't fully understand what he meant until we were actually out there. The drive was long, almost 6 hours from the nearest real town, and the last 40 miles were nothing but dirt roads, pine trees, and the occasional deer darting across the trail. When we finally pulled up to the cabin, it was already late afternoon. The place was small, built from thick logs with a green tin roof that looked like it had been hammered into place sometime in the 70s. There was a wide porch that creaked when you stepped on it, a single-pane window near the front door, and a rusted-out fire pit off to the side. No neighbors, no power lines, no signs of life. My phone hadn't had service since we passed the last gas station an hour back. Jake seemed totally at home, though. He said his grandfather used to take him out there as a kid. It had running water from a nearby creek, and we had a portable generator in case we needed some electricity. But he said we'd mostly be off-grid. I didn't mind at first. It was kind of peaceful being that cut off from everything. The first night passed quietly. We drank a few beers by the fire, talked about work and old memories from high school, and watched the stars. The sky out there was incredible. So many stars that it didn't even seem real. You don't get skies like that in the city. We turned in around midnight. The cabin had 2 small bedrooms, each with old wooden bed frames and thin mattresses that felt like they'd been there forever. I was so tired from the drive that I fell asleep almost immediately. The second day, we hiked around the nearby woods for a while, cooked some food on the fire pit, and explored an old shed behind the cabin that was filled with rusted tools and old hunting gear. Nothing felt strange yet, just quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you realize how much constant noise you're used to. Out there, even the wind felt louder. No distant traffic, no buzzing streetlights, no people. Just the trees and the occasional creaking of the cabin walls settling. That second night is when things got weird. We were sitting out by the fire again, around 11. It was colder than the night before, and the wind had picked up a little, rustling through the trees like a distant whisper. We had the fire going pretty good, big crackling flames, throwing shadows against the tree line that started maybe 50 feet from the cabin. We were halfway through a bottle of whiskey, not drunk, but definitely buzzed talking about stupid things like which animal we'd least want to be attacked by. Jake had just said a moose, hands down, when we heard it, crunching leaves. Footsteps. We both paused, listening. At first I thought maybe it was an animal, maybe a deer or an elk. The steps were slow, steady, too heavy for a raccoon or something like that. Jake stood up and squinted toward the trees. "You hear that?" he asked me. I nodded but said nothing. The fire popped loudly, making us both flinch. Then the footsteps stopped. Jake called out, "Hey, anyone there?" His voice was loud and clear, cutting through the stillness. For a second, there was nothing, just wind and fire. Then from between the trees, a figure stepped out. A man. He was maybe 40 or 50, skinny to the point of looking sick, wearing a ripped shirt and cargo pants that were wet and clinging to his legs. No shoes. His feet were dirty, probably cut up from walking through the woods barefoot. He didn't say anything, just stood there, 20 feet away, on the edge of the firelight, watching us. His face was what really got me. Gaunt, pale, with the kind of grin that didn't look right. It was too wide, too forced, like someone pretending to smile without knowing how. His eyes were wide open, staring directly at us. I stood up too, slowly. We were both frozen, not sure what to do. Jake shouted again, telling the guy to leave. Still nothing. Just that damn smile in those eyes. He wasn't blinking. I felt this kind of quiet panic building in my chest, like my body knew something was wrong before my brain caught up. Jake stepped back toward the cabin and grabbed something from the porch. It was a flare gun. He held it up and aimed high, then fired. The flare hissed as it went up, bursting into red light above the trees. For a moment, everything was lit up in that eerie red glow. Trees, smoke, and the stranger's face, which didn't change. Then, without a sound, he turned and ran back into the woods. Not stumbling, not yelling, just turned and moved fast, like he knew exactly where he was going. Disappeared into the trees like smoke. We didn't sleep that night. We locked the door, pushed one of the heavy wooden dressers in front of it, and took turns staying awake. Every little sound outside made us jump. At some point in the early morning, we thought we heard something scraping against the side of the cabin. Then silence again. As soon as the sun started to rise, we packed up, threw everything into the back of Jake's truck without even bothering to organize it. We didn't speak much, just moved fast. The air felt heavy, like the woods themselves were watching us. Jake kept glancing toward the tree line, like he expected that man to appear again. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, just out of sight, still smiling. The drive back felt endless. We didn't see another car until we were almost to the main highway. When we finally got service again, I had dozens of missed notifications and texts. I didn't respond to any of them until we were back in civilization. We didn't report it. What would we even say? That some barefoot guy stared at us in the woods and then ran off? The forest is public land. People go out there all the time. There was no crime, no real threat anyone could prove. Just a feeling, a deep, gnawing sense that something wasn't right. A few weeks later, Jake said he asked his uncle, who owned the cabin, if anyone lived nearby. The uncle said no one for miles. But he did mention something about a hermit that used to live out there years ago, someone who disappeared after getting evicted from a hunting shack farther north. No one ever found him, just his camp abandoned. I haven't gone camping since. Not like that. Not out in the middle of nowhere with no signal, no backup, no exit. I don't think Jake has either. We don't talk about it much. Every now and then, one of us will bring it up, just a single sentence. Remember that guy? And the other will nod, silent. We left at dawn, and we never went back. I worked in Yellowstone National Park in the summer of 2011, and again from spring through fall in 2013. During those stretches, I got used to a lot of things. Wildlife traffic jams, unpredictable weather, tourists asking if they could pet the bison, but I never fully got used to the idea that at any moment, a bear could wander through camp. In the summer of 2013, I was dating a girl who had the same kind of love for wild places as I did. She came out west with me that year, and one weekend, we decided to go camping just outside of Cook City. I had heard from a ranger back in 2011 that there'd been a bear attack at one of the campgrounds around there. 3 people were attacked and 1 didn't survive. I didn't remember all the details, just that it stuck with me. I always had that story in the back of my head when we talked about going into grizzly territory. We picked a spot not far from the stream, just a short drive out of town. It was early July. The wildflowers were out, the air smelled like pine and wet grass, and during the day, it felt peaceful, calm. We got the tent set up and made a small dinner on the camp stove. Ramen and trail mix, nothing special. Afterward, we drove into Cook City to grab a real meal at a small diner. The kind of place where the floors creak and the tables have that sticky layer no matter how many times they get wiped down. I asked the waiter if it was true, what I'd heard about the bear attack a few years back. He nodded, didn't say much else. Just gave this kind of solemn confirmation that, yes, it happened. Same campground we were staying at. That stuck with me. I didn't tell my girlfriend the full story. I didn't want to freak her out. But as we drove back and the last of the light started fading behind the mountains, I could feel the tension building in my chest. The road narrowed and twisted along the trees, and I kept glancing at the woods on either side, half expecting to see something big move between the trunks. Back at camp, the air had cooled down a lot. We got into the tent, zipped up for the night. She kept the bear spray next to her sleeping bag, and I had a wooden softball bat next to mine. I'm not sure what I thought I'd do with it. Maybe it was just something to hold on to, something that made me feel like I had even a little bit of control if something were to come up on us in the night. It took me a while to fall asleep. I kept listening, wind moving through the trees, the soft sound of the creek nearby, and every so often the crack of a twig in the distance. Yellowstone does that to you. It sharpens everything. Makes you hear things you'd ignore back in town. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up with my bladder screaming. I'd made the rookie mistake of downing too much water before bed. At first, I just lay there, trying to convince myself I could go back to sleep, that maybe I didn't really need to go that bad. But the pressure kept building. I turned slowly onto my side, try not to wake her up, and I started to sit up when I heard something. It wasn't a small noise. It wasn't a squirrel or raccoon. I heard splashing, slow, heavy splashing, coming from the stream, maybe 30 yards away. One splash, then another, then another. Steady, deliberate. Something large was crossing the water. My entire body tensed. I felt this rush of adrenaline shoot through me like I'd just been shocked. My ears rang with it. I held my breath and listened. The splashing stopped. Then, I heard heavy steps, something moving through the wet brush on our side of the stream. The sound of a large animal walking. You can tell the difference when something big is out there. You feel it in the ground more than you hear it. Thud, crunch, pause, another step. It was getting closer. Whatever it was coming up the embankment toward our tent. I stayed frozen, lying back down slowly, my hand inching across the sleeping bags toward the bear spray. Every inch took forever. I didn't want to make a sound. Didn't want to breathe too loud. I finally reached the can and gripped it tight. My girlfriend stirred a little. I could tell she was waking up. She started to lift her head, and I reached over and put my hand gently over her mouth before she could speak. Her eyes went wide. I leaned close and whispered, "Don't move." We lay there together, barely breathing, ears tuned in to every sound. The steps continued, now directly outside our tent. They circled slowly, like the animal was inspecting us. I could hear it sniffing. There was a soft, rhythmic noise too, kind of like a hollow knock. A thump, then steps, then that thump again. It repeated. It made no sense. Thump, step, thump, step. I pictured a bear pawing at something, maybe smacking a log or rock around. I could hear it exhale loudly once, like a puff of air from big lungs. My knuckles were white around the bear spray. The silence between the steps was the worst part, just waiting, not knowing. My girlfriend grabbed my wrist tightly and didn't let go. Her breathing was fast and shallow. Eventually, we worked up the nerve to unzip the inner tent door just a few inches. The outer fly was still down, but I slowly unzipped it too. Everything was lit up by the moon, bright and silver over the tree line. It was full and high, casting long shadows across the clearing. What we saw made my brain short-circuit for a moment. It wasn't a bear. There was a bull elk standing maybe 10 feet from our tent. Massive, towering over the fire ring, muscles rippling beneath its hide. Its antlers looked like something out of a painting, broad, sharp, dangerous. Next to him was a doe, grazing quietly. The bull had a rock in his mouth. I watched as he tilted his head, opened his jaw slightly, and let the rock fall to the ground. Thunk! Then he picked it back up, moved a few feet, and did it again. Thunk! I don't know why. I'd never seen that behavior before. Maybe it was some kind of posturing. Maybe he liked the sound, but he kept doing it, picking it up, dropping it, walking in a circle. We stayed still, just watching. Eventually, they both moved off, wandering back into the woods the same way they came. The bull dropped the rock one last time, let out a snort, and disappeared into the trees. I finally exhaled fully, all the tension draining from my body. My hand was shaking. I set the bear spray down and just lay there on my back, staring at the top of the tent. My girlfriend didn't say anything. She just rolled over and held on to me. I never did get up to pee. We packed up the next morning, just after sunrise. We didn't even bother with breakfast. Neither of us felt like hanging around. There's something unsettling about realizing how close you were to a massive animal in the dark when you had no idea what it was. The drive back to the park was quiet. The sun was starting to warm things up, and the trees sparkled from the morning dew. It was beautiful, peaceful even, but I kept checking the rearview mirror. Later that summer, I read more about elk behavior and saw someone mention how they sometimes play with rocks or bones, especially bulls during the rut. I don't know if that's what we saw or if that bull was just an odd one, but I'll never forget the sound of that rock dropping over and over in the dead silence of a Yellowstone night. Camping in grizzly country does something to your nerves. It humbles you, reminds you where you are on the food chain. That night, we got lucky. It was just an elk, but it could have been something else. I was hiking in a forest in Northern California once, deep in one of those areas where the trees stretch endlessly in every direction and the undergrowth is thick enough to make you feel like you're walking through a tunnel of green. My friend and I had planned to do the full loop of the trail that day, about 10 miles. It was the kind of trail where you could go a long while without seeing anyone else, and that's part of what I liked about it. Quiet, isolated, just you and the woods. We had started early, with our packs light, mostly snacks and water. Around the third or fourth mile, my friend started to slow down. He told me he was getting a migraine, and it was hitting him hard. He had one of those prescription meds in his bag, but once those hit him, he'd be useless for a few hours. He knew there was a fire road nearby that cut straight back to the campsite, so he told me he was going to take the shortcut and rest. I double-checked he had everything he needed, then watched him disappear down the slope, moving slow and holding the side of his head. I figured I'd finish the trail. It wasn't too far, and I wanted the time alone anyway. The trail got quieter after that. It was just me and the wind brushing through the treetops, the occasional rustle of something small in the brush, birds calling out overhead. I wasn't in a rush, so I moved at a slow, steady pace. I remember the ground was soft, almost spongy in places from the moisture. It had rained a few days earlier, and everything smelled like wet leaves and pine. About halfway down a long descent on the back half of the loop, I started to feel like something had shifted. Wasn't anything obvious, but you know when your body picks up on something your mind hasn't noticed yet? That's what it felt like. Just off. I stopped walking and stood still, listening. That's when I heard the first scream. It was sharp and echoing, far off but loud enough to make me freeze. At first I couldn't tell what it was. I thought maybe someone had fallen, or maybe some idiot was messing around. But then it came again, louder, angrier, a wild, bone-deep scream that didn't sound quite human. It was coming from somewhere to my left, downhill in a thicker part of the woods where the trees closed in tight and the trail curved away. I stayed still, trying to listen. My heart was pounding in my chest. It didn't sound like a person anymore. Not really. It was too guttural, too animal. That's when it hit me. It was probably a mountain lion. I'd read about the sounds they make before. I'd even heard recordings. And sometimes when they scream, it can sound like a woman being attacked. I just stood there for a few long seconds, frozen. Part of me wanted to make noise, shout, clap, do something to scare it away. That's what you're supposed to do with mountain lions, right? But another part of me, a deeper, older part, was saying, don't move. Stay quiet. Listen, because if it wasn't a mountain lion, then what was it? My mouth was dry. My throat felt like it had closed up. I forced myself to breathe slowly and try to pinpoint exactly where the sound was coming from. It echoed strangely through the trees, bouncing around, but I could tell it was downhill and a little behind me. It hadn't gotten closer. Yet, I slowly started walking again, this time deliberately choosing every step, making as little noise as possible. I wasn't running, but I wasn't wasting any time either. My eyes scanned every tree, every shadow. I kept thinking I saw movement just out of the corner of my eye, but it was always just branches or leaves or nothing at all. The screaming came again, this time a little farther off, like it was moving away or circling. It was hard to tell. By the time I made it back to camp, I was shaking. My shirt was stuck to my back with sweat, even though it wasn't hot. My friend was in his hammock, looking half asleep, totally unaware of what I'd just gone through. I didn't say much, just grabbed a bottle of water and sat down, trying to steady my hands. I must have looked like a ghost because he asked if I was all right, and I just nodded. I didn't tell him about the screams until much later. A few months after that, I was at a music festival in the desert. Totally different scene, crowded, loud, full of people. We were camped out in a huge, open area packed with tents. There was barely enough room to walk between them. You could hear a dozen different songs playing from all directions, people laughing, talking, partying all through the night. I'd gone with a few friends, but that night, it was just me and one of them in our tent. The others had crashed elsewhere. It was early morning, dawn, that weird gray light before the sun really comes up. I was half awake, lying on my side in my sleeping bag, my face against the fabric of the tent wall. I heard an engine start, close by. At first, I didn't think anything of it. People come and go, even at that hour. Then I heard tires crunching over dry gravel and sand. Closer, a lot closer. I rolled onto my back and looked toward the tent door. Red light was glowing through the thin fabric tail lights, and they were getting brighter. I sat up just in time to realize a truck was reversing straight toward us. There was no time to yell, no time to unzip the tent or grab anything. I threw my arm over my friend, who was still out cold, and yanked her toward me with everything I had. The second she rolled onto my chest, the back wheel of the truck hit our tent. It crushed the corner of it, just flattened it. The sound of nylon ripping, the air mattress deflating under us, and then the unmistakable crunch of metal on tent poles. Our gear in that part of the tent was destroyed. Her sleeping bag was ripped clean down the side. If I hadn't pulled her when I did, that tire would have gone right over her legs. The truck didn't stop. It just kept rolling slowly, then pulled forward again and drove off between other tents like nothing had happened. By the time we got out, heart pounding, the driver was gone. A few people nearby were waking up, looking around, but no one had seen who it was. No plate, no description, just a truck and a sea of them. We reported it to the staff, of course, but nothing ever came of it. They made some announcements, told people to be careful, but that was it. I didn't sleep much after that. I kept replaying it in my head, how fast it all happened, how close it was. The weight of her body on mine, the shaking of the ground, that horrible tearing sound. I still think about both of those days sometimes. Alone in the woods, hearing something that didn't belong, nearly crushed under a truck because someone was too drunk or stupid to think. People talk about camping and hiking like it's peaceful, and yeah, sometimes it is, but it doesn't take much for everything to go sideways. I've been back out in the woods since then, and I've been to festivals, but I'm never quite as relaxed as I used to be. Now I listen harder. I watch more closely. I never assume I'm safe just because I'm surrounded by trees or people. Sometimes the scariest parts of life aren't the things that go bump in the night. They're the ones that come with an engine or a scream you can't place. And they don't care if you're ready or not. The first time I ever took my now wife backpacking, I thought it would be a good way to introduce her to the kind of peace I find out in the woods. I grew up around trails and trees, camping with my dad since I was a kid, and I always wanted to share that part of my life with her. She was excited too, though she'd never done more than a few car camping trips. We picked a spot deep in the forest, a trail I'd been on once before with friends years back. It wasn't anything extreme, but remote enough that we wouldn't run into anyone else for the weekend. It was early spring, cold and damp, but quiet and beautiful, the kind of trip I like best. The hiking was fine, but something caught my attention not long after we left the car. Cougar tracks. They weren't super fresh, but they weren't old either. At first I didn't say anything, just made note of them. I've run into mountain lions once or twice in my life. Always at a distance, never aggressive. I knew they were around, and most of the time, they want nothing to do with people. Still, I kept an eye out. I started noticing more tracks as we climbed in elevation, and eventually pointed them out to her. She was more curious than nervous, asked how I could tell how fresh they were. I told her I wasn't totally sure, but they didn't look like they'd been made in the last few hours. There'd been some light drizzle earlier in the day, and they looked dry around the edges. We kept going. The forest was thick with pine, and the trail wound up through a narrow ridge before opening to a small plateau overlooking a valley. That's where we made camp. There was a perfect little spot just off the trail, surrounded by tall trees and soft forest floor, mostly pine needles and dirt. Easy to set up the tent. We got the fire going and cooked a quick meal. Nothing fancy, just ramen and some jerky. The air was cold, but not unbearable, and the clouds rolled in just as we zipped up for the night. We fell asleep to the sound of light rain tapping against the tent, both of us tired from the hike, but happy. What I didn't expect was what we'd find the next morning. It had stopped raining during the night. I woke up early, like I usually do when I'm camping. The air was sharp and damp, and everything felt still. I unzipped the tent, stepped out barefoot onto the ground, and just froze. The ground around the tent was absolutely covered in cougar tracks. Not a few, not scattered, covered. Every direction. You could see the trail of where it had come down from the ridge, circled our tent multiple times, stopped here and there. The clearest ones were right next to where our heads had been inside the tent. I could see the big, padded paw prints stopping just inches from the fabric on each side. It had sniffed us out, no doubt about it. It had walked up and down the side of the tent while we were dead asleep in the middle of the night. The rain had cleared any sign of our prints from the night before. These cougar tracks were the only ones there, crisp and perfect in the soft earth. That minute came after the rain had stopped. Sometime after we had fallen asleep, while we were lying there unaware, that cat had crept down and inspected the hell out of us. I didn't say anything for a while. I just stood there, slowly walking the perimeter, tracing the trail it had taken. I didn't see any blood or scratch marks or signs of aggression. It hadn't tried to claw at the tent, but it had been curious. Really curious. Maybe hungry too. When I finally told her, she was quiet. Not scared exactly, just a little stunned. We moved slow that morning. No sudden movements, packed everything up quietly. There was a sort of calm urgency to it. I didn't want to make her panic, but I also didn't want to hang around longer than we needed to. We kept our gear tight. No mess, no food scraps, nothing that could draw anything back. When we started walking back, I noticed another set of tracks on top of ours from the day before. 2 sets, a pair of cougar prints, side by side for a while, then splitting and rejoining. It followed the trail almost exactly all the way back out. It had been behind us, watching, quietly, probably for a long time. We never saw it, not once, never heard it. No snap of twigs, no brush moving, nothing. And that was the part that stuck with me. The silence. That thing had come down, circled us, walked right up to us, and then followed our steps out, and we never knew. We made it back to the car without incident. The drive home was quiet for the first hour or so. She didn't talk much. Neither did I. I think we were both trying to figure out how close we'd actually come to something bad happening. Now, I don't mean being attacked exactly. That cat had every chance to do that if it wanted to. But we were in its home. It was doing what wild things do. Curious, cautious, maybe sizing us up. In the end, it left us alone. That's more than I can say for a lot of people. That trip stuck with me for a long time. And as it turns out, it wouldn't be the last weird animal encounter we'd have. The next time we went backpacking was about a year later. Same general region. Not quite as remote, but still quiet. We hiked a loop trail with a couple good camping spots along the way. The second morning, As we were walking out, we came across two black bear cubs just off the trail. They were maybe 50 feet up the hill, tumbling around a tree like oversized puppies. I saw them before she did. We stopped walking and just watched them. They climbed up and down the tree a few times, ran in circles. No sign of the mother. I took a few quick photos, but something about it felt off. Bear cubs are never alone. I pulled out my revolver. I've carried it for years when I'm backpacking, though I've never had to fire it. It's not even about animals most of the time. People scare me more. Still, in that moment, it felt like the right call to have in my hand. I told her to walk in front of me and keep a steady pace. We started moving again, slow and loud enough that any animal nearby could hear us. Talking calmly, no sudden movements, just walking. About 20 yards later, she saw the mother, just through the trees on the opposite side of the trail. Not far. She was down low, watching, not moving, not making noise, just watching. We were exactly between her and the cubs. And if you know anything about black bears, you know that's probably the worst place you can be. We just kept walking, same pace, no running, no looking back, just kept talking. Not loud, not quiet, enough to say, "We're here, we're not a threat, we're leaving." She didn't move. She let us pass. After maybe another 100 yards, I turned back and didn't see her anymore. I tucked the revolver back in its holster. We made it back to the trailhead without anything else happening. No scratches, no charges, no drama. But once again, it reminded me how close the line is out there. The forest is beautiful, peaceful, and honest. But it doesn't care if you're scared or unprepared. We weren't doing anything wrong either time. Just walking, camping, being respectful. But when you step out there, you're stepping into someone else's space, something else's world. Most of the time, if you act right and don't do anything stupid, things leave you alone. But not always, and never because you deserve it, just because they let you. We still go backpacking. She's into it more now than she was before. But we're always careful. We plan, we stay alert, and we never assume we're alone, even when it's quiet, especially when it's quiet. I went on a solo camping trip one weekend in early fall. It wasn't too cold yet, just cool enough to keep most of the bugs down and the crowds away. I've been dealing with a lot at work and just needed to clear my head, get out into the trees, and unplug for a couple days. I picked a small, semi-primitive site in a national forest that allowed for tent camping. It wasn't backcountry, but it was quiet, remote enough to be peaceful, and far enough from cell towers that I wouldn't have any signal. The campsite itself was pretty simple. A narrow dirt road led in, and there were maybe 5 or 6 sites spaced far apart with fire rings and picnic tables. Mine was tucked into a little curve in the road near a stand of pines with a good amount of flat ground to pitch my tent. I set up the tent quickly, just a standard 2-person dome tent, nothing fancy. I'd been using it for years. The rain fly rolled and clipped nicely at the top when it wasn't needed, which it wasn't that weekend. The forecast said dry weather the whole time. The first night was uneventful. I made a small fire, cooked some instant noodles in my little camp pot, and sipped on a beer while listening to the distant calls of owls and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. I read for a bit by lantern light before turning in early. The tent was cozy, and I fell asleep to the quiet hum of the forest. The second day, I went for a hike. Nothing extreme, just a few miles along a nearby trail that looped back toward the campground. I saw some deer, squirrels, a raccoon. Pretty standard stuff. There was something peaceful about being alone out there, taking my time, stopping when I wanted, breathing in the clean air. When I got back to camp, I made another fire, grilled some sausage, and watched the stars come out. Again, everything felt calm, uneventful. The next morning was when it happened. It was the last day of my trip. I had already packed up most of my gear the night before, so I wouldn't be rushing in the morning. I woke up early, just as the sun was creeping through the trees, and started breaking down camp. The tent was the last thing to go. I shook out the sleeping bag, rolled up the pad, stuffed everything back in my pack. Then I started taking down the tent. The way I pack it is always the same. I pull out the stakes, unclip the poles, fold them down, and then collapse the body of the tent. The rain fly I had rolled up and clipped on the first day since there hadn't been any rain. It folds into this little pouch at the top of the tent, just above the door, tucked in tight. I reached up to unroll it and noticed a few strands of spider silk in the crease. That didn't surprise me. It's pretty normal to find bugs taking up temporary residence in tents if they're left alone for a while. I figured I'd knock out the webbing and give it a quick shake before packing it up. I leaned in and started pulling gently at the rolled fabric. It had gathered a little dust and pine needle fluff over the weekend. As I worked it out of the crease, more of the web came loose. It wasn't very thick, just a kind of fine, wispy silk you see stretched between rocks or grass. I didn't think much of it. I got my fingers around one of the straps and gave it a tug to release the last part of the fly. And that's when I felt something shift. There was a flicker of movement, just a quick jerk of something black inside the crease. I paused, looked closer, and before I could even register what I was looking at, a black widow spider lunged straight at my finger. It happened in a blink. It didn't fall out or scurry away. It lunged, fast, direct, aggressive. Its legs flared wide, and its body snapped forward like it was striking. I yanked my hand back so fast I lost my balance and nearly fell on my ass in the dirt. The spider missed. Just barely. I mean by what must have been a fraction of an inch. I stood there frozen, heart pounding in my chest like I just dodged a car accident. I stared at the web for a long moment, and there it was, clearly a black widow. Glossy black body, spindly legs, and that unmistakable red hourglass on the underside of its fat little belly. It had retreated a bit back into the folded fly, but I could still see the shimmer of the web it had made. It wasn't much of a web, just a messy tangle in that crease of fabric, but it was enough. My pulse was racing, and my fingers were trembling a bit. I didn't want to crush it. I don't have a problem with spiders in general. They're just doing their thing. But getting bitten by a black widow out here, an hour from the nearest town, would have completely ruined my day. Or worse, sent me to the ER. I'd read enough to know black widow bites aren't always deadly, especially to adults, but they can cause some real pain and muscle cramping. Not something I wanted to deal with out in the middle of nowhere alone. So I took a breath, calmed myself down, and went to my car for a stick and one of my empty food containers. I slowly used the stick to prod the spider out of the fly and guide it gently into the plastic box. It didn't try to bolt this time, just skittered into the container like it had given up. I sealed the lid with a few small holes in it and carried it out to a tree well away from camp, near the edge of the woods. I tipped it out onto the base of a fallen log and watched it scurry under the bark. Gone. I walked back to camp still a little shaky, but relieved. I gave the tent one more careful check, shook it out again, and packed it up. No more surprises. I double-checked my boots before slipping them on, just in case. I kept glancing around for a while, half expecting to find another one crawling up my leg, but that was it. Just the one spider. The whole drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about how close that bite had been. I kept imagining what would have happened if I hadn't pulled back fast enough. Would I have even noticed the bite right away? Would it have started to burn or sting as I was still packing up? How would I have handled the drive out if the symptoms kicked in? Nausea, cramps, anxiety, sweating. I'd read all the side effects. None of them sounded like anything I wanted to experience while trapped in a car, an hour from help on winding forest roads. In the end, it was fine. I got home safely. I unpacked, aired out the tent, and checked every seam and pocket for more stowaways. That little close call stuck with me, though. It wasn't some dramatic story with bears or strange people or anything like that. Just a spider in the wrong place at the wrong time, acting on instinct. But that moment, seeing it strike at my finger like that, got burned into my memory. Now, every time I pack up a tent or roll up a fly, I check the creases. I shake everything out twice. I even keep a pair of gloves in my camping bag, just for breakdown now. It's not paranoia. It's just respect for how close I came to having my trip end in a completely different way. Just goes to show that even a tiny thing, something most people wouldn't even think twice about, can change everything in an instant. I rented the cabin because I needed to get away. It was cheap, tucked in the woods about 2 hours outside the city, and the listing said it had no Wi-Fi and barely any phone reception. Exactly what I wanted. I was trying to finish a short story I'd been stuck on for weeks, and I figured the quiet would help me get my head straight. It was late October, chilly, but not freezing, and most of the leaves had already fallen. The place looked peaceful in the photos. A small wooden structure with a sloped roof, a front porch, and a little wood stove inside. I arrived in the afternoon on a Friday. The owner had left the key in a lockbox attached to the porch railing, just like she said. There was no one around, just trees and the sound of wind pushing through dry branches. The cabin sat on a slight hill, backed by thick woods. No neighbors in sight. I unpacked my duffel bag, laptop, some groceries, and a few notebooks, then walked around to get a feel for the place. It was smaller than it looked in the pictures. One main room with a bed in the corner, a little table and 2 chairs near a narrow window, and a kitchenette that smelled faintly of damp wood. There was a short hallway with a bathroom on one side and a small closet at the end. The closet door didn't quite close all the way. It hung a little crooked. It was getting dark when I settled in. I made a quick dinner, ramen and toast, then started writing. The place was quiet except for the wind outside and the occasional creak of the floorboards. The kind of quiet that lets you hear everything, even your own breathing. Around 10 p.m., I went to lock the front door, and that's when I saw them. 4 long, deep scratches running vertically down the inside of the door, about shoulder height, as if something had dragged heavy claws, or maybe a tool, down the wood. They were old, faded and weathered, but clearly deep. The paint around them had peeled slightly, like they'd been there a long time. I stood staring at them longer than I probably should have. They fell out of place. I ran my fingers along the grooves. They were rough and uneven. Not clean cuts, more like gouges. The kind of thing someone does in a panic. Maybe, I couldn't tell. I ended up pushing a small chair under the doorknob for the night, just in case. I wasn't scared exactly, just uneasy. It's weird how things like that can make you feel watched, even when there's no one around. The next morning, I drove about 15 minutes down the road to a gas station to get a cup of coffee and check my messages. That's where I ran into the woman who owned the cabin. She was filling her car at one of the pumps. I walked over, told her I was staying in her place for the weekend, and mentioned the scratches on the door, trying to sound casual about it. She hesitated for a second, then just said, "That door came from another property." Her tone changed immediately after that. She didn't offer anything else, didn't ask if everything was okay, just turned away like the conversation was over. I stood there for a second, not sure what to say. I started to ask where the door came from originally, but she cut me off with something about being late and got in her car. The way she acted made the whole thing sit heavier in my chest. I watched her drive off, then stood there staring at the road for a while. I didn't do much writing that day. I tried, but I kept looking at the front door. I made myself some coffee, sat on the porch for a bit, read through some of my old notes, and even tried going for a short walk around the property to clear my head. But something about that answer, came from another property, kept looping in my head. It wasn't just vague. It was like she didn't want to remember. Or maybe she did, and just didn't want me to know. That night, I stayed up a little later. I had the wood stove going, and I was drinking cheap instant coffee just to keep myself busy. Around 1 a.m., I finally crawled into bed. It was cold, even with the stove. I was drifting off, half asleep, when I heard it. Scratching. Soft, deliberate. Coming from the hallway. I held my breath. My first thought was that maybe a raccoon or a squirrel had gotten inside. But the scratching wasn't random. It had a rhythm. It was slow and steady, like something testing a surface. My heart was pounding by the time I sat up. I listened. The sound was coming from the closet at the end of the hall. I knew it without even needing to get up. I stayed in bed for a long time just listening. The sound didn't stop. It would go quiet for a minute or two, then come back. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Always 3 or 4 times, then silence again. I finally got up, slow and careful. I didn't want to make any noise. I didn't turn on the lights. I crept across the room, past the table, the chairs, the front door. I stood at the hallway entrance, peering into the dark. I couldn't see much. The bathroom door was closed. The closet door was cracked open, about 2 inches. The scratching had stopped again. I stood there for a while, not moving, not breathing too loud. Then, suddenly, the closet door creaked just slightly. Just a small shift, like weight leaning against it. I backed away, turned around, grabbed my keys and phone from the table, and left. I didn't even grab my bag. I just left. I didn't run, but I walked fast. The night air was freezing, but I didn't care. I got in my car, started it, and drove. I didn't stop until I was back on the highway. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror like an idiot. There was nothing there, just dark road and empty forest behind me. I didn't tell anyone about it for a few days. Eventually, I emailed the owner, said I had to leave early for personal reasons, and asked if she could mail my bag to my apartment. She never replied. A few days later, the listing for the cabin disappeared from the rental site. About a week after that, I got a cardboard box in the mail with no return address. My bag was inside. Nothing missing, but the zipper was broken, like it had been forced open. I never went back. I don't know what the scratches were from. I don't know what was inside the closet. I don't want to know. Whatever it wasn't a ghost or some made-up monster. It was real. It had weight. It moved things. It was in there. Something had used that closet before, and it hadn't left. And that door, whatever place it came from, maybe it should have stayed there. I was car camping with my girlfriend up near Mary's Peak, outside of Corvallis, Oregon. It was early fall, late enough in the year that it got dark quick and cold after sunset, but still warm enough during the day that you could be out in a t-shirt. We had taken the weekend off and planned a little getaway. We packed up the car with our sleeping bags, some snacks, a couple camp chairs, and a cooler full of beer and easy food. Nothing fancy, just trying to get away from town for a bit and enjoy some quiet. We found a little turnout along one of the dirt roads up near the top. It wasn't an official campground, but it was clear people used it often. There was a little fire ring made of rocks someone had set up before, and an incredible view down into the valley. You could see for miles out there, rolling green hills and pines, the trees thinning out at the higher elevations. We parked the car with the back facing out toward the overlook. After a short walk around and some snacks, we decided to hang out in the car for the night. We weren't in the mood to pitch a tent, and honestly the back of the Subaru was just as comfortable. The sun went down around 7:30. It was one of those soft dusks where the light fades slowly and everything turns that deep blue. We had a couple lanterns and some string lights running off a battery pack inside the car. Music low, windows cracked, a couple beers in. I remember how calm it felt, just the two of us in that quiet, like we were the only people in the world. Around 10, maybe 10:30, we were both a little buzzed and just talking when headlights lit up the trees behind us. It was a line of trucks. 4 of them, maybe 5. Big ones too, diesel pickups lifted loud. They rumbled up slowly, headlights sweeping through the branches. They pulled into the overlook area with us, coming in closer than I would have liked. One of them parked maybe 10 feet from the side of our car. I could see a few guys get out, silhouettes moving in the light from their trucks. They didn't say anything to us, didn't knock on the windows, but they looked over at us. It wasn't subtle. Our windows were foggy, but the lights inside made it obvious we were there. You could see movement, shadows, everything. They stood near the edge of the overlook, looking out like we had done earlier. Then after a couple minutes, they all got back in their trucks and drove off, continuing down the same dirt path. I tried to stay calm about it. I kept telling myself it's public land, we don't own the view, and maybe they were just out for a drive. But it sat weird with both of us. The way they didn't say anything, the way they parked so close. Too casual to be friendly, too quiet to feel right. We tried to brush it off. Maybe they were just local kids or students from OSU blowing off steam. Still, I locked the car doors. We dimmed the lights and got our stuff organized to sleep. Around 11:15 or so, just as we were lying back trying to settle in, we heard the engines again. Louder this time and coming fast. All the trucks came roaring back. They weren't just driving, they were speeding. The tires kicked up gravel, headlights swinging wildly. They stopped maybe 20 to 30 feet from us, forming this semicircle around the edge of the overlook. Engines idling. No one got out at first. It was dead, quiet except for the sound of the engines. My girlfriend gripped my arm and didn't say anything. I sat up, heart hammering, trying to listen, trying to figure out if we should leave or just stay still. After what felt like forever, all the doors opened at once, and a bunch of guys jumped out, 6 or 7 at least. They were carrying guns. At first I thought maybe they were just doing target shooting, but it was close to midnight and there were no targets out there. Without saying anything, they started walking past us, down the road behind our car. Then I heard the gunshots. Rapid, sharp. Some sounded like handguns, others clearly rifles. They fired into the woods on the opposite side of the overlook down the slope. Not a warning shot, not hunting, just random shooting into the dark. It was chaotic. Some of them hooped and hollered between bursts of gunfire, but it wasn't fun to listen to. It wasn't like someone celebrating a hit at the range. It sounded drunk and reckless and angry. The kind of noise people make when they're trying to scare something or someone. I was drunk, not blackout drunk, but definitely more than I should have been if I was about to drive. But I knew I couldn't stay there. I had no idea if those guys would turn around and decide to mess with us. I didn't want to be a drunk guy getting questioned by the cops either, but in that moment I didn't care. I pulled myself into the front seat in my underwear, barefoot, no shirt, and turned the ignition. My girlfriend had already thrown everything into the back and was in the passenger seat, holding her phone like a weapon. I didn't even wait to buckle in. I hit the gas and took off down the road, swerving around the corner as fast as I could. We didn't look back. I don't know if they saw us leave. I don't think they cared. They were too busy lighting up the trees with bullets. I didn't want to risk the main highway, didn't want to get pulled over reeking of beer and adrenaline. So I drove for about half an hour deeper into the back roads until I found another turnout I knew. It was smaller, more hidden. Trees on all sides. No view. Just a dirt patch and room for a car. We parked there and sat in the dark. No lights. No music. Just sat there trying to calm down. Our ears were still ringing from the gunshots. My mouth was dry. My heart wouldn't stop hammering. Neither of us could sleep. Every time a branch cracked outside or the wind moved the trees, I flinched. She stayed curled up in a sleeping bag next to me, but I could tell she was just as wired. We stayed like that until first light. Didn't say much, just waited. In the morning, when the sun finally pushed through the trees, we packed up everything quickly and drove back to the original spot. I didn't want to go, but I needed to see. I needed to confirm it wasn't some hallucination or overreaction. When we got there, the place looked trashed. Beer cans, White Claws mostly, were scattered all over the gravel. Probably 20 or more, some crushed, some standing upright. Shell casings littered the ground. Brass and steel, a mix of calibers. Some were still warm to the touch, half buried in the dust. There were even a couple broken glass bottles near the overlook edge. It reeked of stale booze and gunpowder. We didn't stay long. I took a couple pictures just in case. Didn't know if I'd report it or what, but it felt like something I should document. My girlfriend was quiet. We got back in the car and drove home. I've camped a lot since then, but I've never gone back to Mary's Peak. Not after dark. And I've never camped without a quick exit plan since that night. I still don't own a gun, probably never will, but that night was the first time I understood why some people carry out in the woods. It's not for bears or mountain lions. It's for people like that. The kind that show up out of nowhere, drunk and armed, and treat the forest like it's their playground, like everyone else is just furniture in the background of their chaos. We got lucky. That's all it was. We were just lucky they didn't turn their attention on us. I don't know what would have happened if we'd still been asleep when they came back, or if I hadn't been sober enough to drive, or if one of them decided to be a little more curious about our car. I don't think I want to know. This past summer, my partner and I planned a camping trip in the Adirondacks. We were both craving something quiet and remote, something that felt more like true wilderness than your average campground with other people, just a few feet away. I'd spent a few nights browsing around online and eventually came across this privately owned little backwoods campsite. It only had 2 lots, and the photos made it look peaceful, right by the water with trees all around. No amenities really, but that was fine. We were going for a rustic vibe. The reviews were all positive, too. People said it was secluded, serene, and great for a quiet getaway. You had to have a 4x4 to reach it, which didn't bother us since we had a decent truck and wanted something a bit off-grid anyway. When we pulled up to the address listed on the site, we realized the owners lived up on the main road in a trailer home. That in itself wouldn't have been odd, but the property around the trailer was unsettling. The first thing I noticed was an old, algae-crusted fish tank lying on its side by the front steps. Then I saw a pile of mangled, dirt-caked stuffed animals stacked by a rusted-out tricycle. There were doll heads, not dolls, just the heads, scattered through their overgrown front lawn, some half-buried, some mounted on sticks. There were disfigured scarecrows propped up around the perimeter of their yard, wearing rain-soaked flannel shirts, missing limbs, heads turned at unnatural angles. And then there was this odd stink in the air. Not quite rot, not quite garbage. Just this strange, stale sourness that stuck in the back of my throat. We went up and met the owners, an older couple who seemed pleasant enough, though they had this way of smiling that didn't quite reach their eyes. They gave us printed out directions to the site, no cell service that deep in the woods, and reassured us that the road had been cleared recently and was totally manageable with a four-wheel drive. We both exchanged a quiet look, but neither of us said anything. We'd already driven hours to get there, and we didn't have a backup plan. We followed their directions and turned off the main road onto a grassy, slightly muddy trail. At first it seemed all right. A little overgrown maybe, but not impassable. The trees were dense and hung low over the path. A few minutes in, it started getting worse. The ground was wetter than it looked, and we started hitting ruts in the trail that had clearly been made when it was much drier. Every few hundred feet, we had to stop, get out, and figure out the best way to get over or around a particularly deep patch of mud. There were puddles the size of kiddie pools, and the rain from earlier in the week had softened everything so much that the truck kept slipping. The branches hanging down were just high enough to avoid cracking the windshield, but they scraped along the roof and sides with a sound that made me clench my jaw. We thought about turning around more than once, but the path had narrowed to the point where reversing out seemed even more dangerous. There wasn't enough room to make a proper turn, and even if we could reverse all the way back, the truck would have to do it uphill, dodging tree roots, puddles, and steep drops. So we kept going. At one point, we stopped to scout ahead on foot and saw what looked like a very fresh, very human footprint in the mud. Barefoot, long toes, deep heel. Definitely not mine, and definitely not my partner's. There was something about the shape and clarity of it that didn't sit right with me. It wasn't old, wasn't worn away by the rain. It looked like it had been made recently, maybe within an hour. No other tracks around it, just that one, in a patch of mud right in the middle of the trail. That was the moment where I truly felt it in my stomach, that gnawing feeling that we were making a mistake. But at that point, we'd already gone so far down the trail that there wasn't really a decision to be made. Either keep going or risk getting stuck trying to get back out. So we pushed forward. When we finally reached the site, I was amazed the truck hadn't bottomed out or gotten stuck for good. It was near a small lake, ringed by trees, and it was quiet in that way that's not peaceful, but unnerving. Like the woods were holding their breath. It was maybe 8:30 p.m. by then, and we were exhausted. We told ourselves we'd stay the night and leave first thing in the morning. We didn't talk about the footprint or the vibe from the owner's place, or the sheer discomfort settling in our bones. We set up the tent quickly, made a small fire with some damp wood we found nearby, and sat in silence. Both of us kept glancing around, listening. Every twig snap made my skin crawl. I felt exposed, like we weren't alone out there. There were no other campers, no distant sounds of civilization. Just insects and frogs and the occasional creak of a branch swaying in the wind. The fire never really caught strong, just smoldered and popped weakly. We didn't eat much, didn't talk. Just sat there, jumpy and exhausted. That night, neither of us slept. I laid there in the tent with my eyes open, staring at the nylon above me. Every sound outside magnified 100 times. The way the rain started to fall again slowly and steadily, soaking the earth even further, made me feel trapped. There were no animal sounds, no raccoons rustling, no owls, just the soft hiss of rain and the occasional plop of water sliding off leaves. My partner lay stiff as a board next to me. I could feel their tension without having to see it. In the early hours, maybe around 3 a.m., I heard something just outside the tent. Not an animal, a slow step, squish, then another. Squish. It moved past the tent and stopped, maybe 10 feet away. I couldn't see anything through the rain-speckled mesh, and I didn't move. just froze, barely breathing. The sound didn't come back, but I never fell back asleep. When morning came, the world was gray and soaked. The trail we had driven down had likely turned into a full-on swamp. I didn't even want to look at it. Neither of us said anything for a while, just packed our things in silence. Eventually, we hiked a good way up on foot to assess the road, and it was even worse than we remembered. But the thought of staying there another night in that secluded site, with that footprint in the mud and the memory of something moving outside our tent, was worse than anything else. We both agreed, without speaking, that we had to try getting out. We got back in the truck, took a deep breath, and started the long, slow, nerve-wracking crawl back up the trail. My partner drove while I leaned out the window to spot puddles, roots, and deep ruts. The tires slid constantly, and twice we nearly got stuck. The mud grabbed at the wheels like quicksand. Every time the truck lurched forward or slipped sideways, my heart stopped. There were moments where we thought we might have to abandon it, hike out, and pay someone to tow it. But by some miracle and my partner's incredible driving instincts, we made it out. When we finally reached the main road again, I swear I almost cried. The relief was overwhelming. The sight of that cracked, sun-baked pavement under the tires felt like deliverance. We didn't even speak until we were 10 minutes down the highway. The silence that followed was heavy, but not tense, just stunned. We found a Dunkin' about an hour later. We were filthy, exhausted, soaked to the bone, and deliriously happy to be out. That bad coffee and lukewarm breakfast sandwich tasted like a 5-star meal. While we sat in the booth, we booked a motel nearby and agreed, silently, that the rest of the trip would involve 4 solid walls, a locking door, and running water. The whole experience still sits with me, even now. I keep thinking about that footprint, the weird stuff around the owner's place. How quiet that forest was, how hard it was to get in, and how much harder it was to get out, and how, the entire time, we both ignored our instincts because we didn't want to be overreacting. But we should have turned back the second we saw those doll heads in the yard. The second the trail started turning to mud. I've never ignored my gut like that again, and I won't in the future. Some places aren't just remote. They're off for a reason. I moved into the duplex in early November. It was on the west side of Chicago, near Humboldt Park, not far from a busy street, but tucked into a quieter block with rows of older houses and 2 flats. I'd found the place through a listing online. The rent was cheap, and the unit was in good shape. Hardwood floors, tall ceilings, a decent kitchen, and laundry in the basement. I didn't ask too many questions. I was just happy to find a place I could afford alone. The first week went by fine. I unpacked my things, bought some groceries, and settled into a routine. The upstairs unit was supposed to be vacant. The landlord, an older guy named Dennis, told me he'd been trying to renovate it, but didn't have time. So I had the whole building to myself, or at least I thought I did. It was the second week when I started hearing noises at night. I sleep light, and Chicago is never truly quiet, but this was different. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, I'd hear faint shuffling, like something dragging across the floor above me, and sometimes a clicking sound, almost like nails tapping wood. I kept telling myself it was just the old building settling or maybe raccoons. But then there was the sound of water running, not from my unit, but below it. It wasn't constant, maybe every few nights, always around the same time. Sometimes it would wake me up, other times I'd already be lying there, staring at the ceiling, waiting for it. The sound of a faucet turning on, a trickle of water, then silence. It didn't make sense. The basement was supposed to be locked up except for the laundry area, and there were no bathrooms down there. I told myself maybe it was just the pipes. Old houses make noise. I'd lived in places before where the plumbing groaned and knocked all night. Still, I started avoiding the basement when it got dark. I'd go down in the afternoons to do laundry, but I'd always leave the light on and move quick. The hallway down there was narrow and dim, with a concrete floor and exposed beams above. The washer and dryer were tucked into an alcove near the stairs, and the rest of the basement was behind a locked wooden door with a sliding bolt. I never had a key to that part. Dennis said it was just storage for old furniture and building supplies. One afternoon, maybe 3 weeks after I moved in, I went down to throw in a load of laundry. The machine was rattling a bit too much, so I stepped around to the side to level it. As I was pushing it back, I felt this sudden cold draft, like air coming from somewhere it shouldn't. It was strong enough to make me pause. I turned toward the wall and saw a tall metal shelf pushed up against it. Behind the shelf, a small gap. The shelf wasn't fixed to anything. It slid easier than I expected when I gave it a shove. That's when I saw the door. Not a proper door, but a slab of wood, maybe from a cabinet, wedged into an opening in the wall. Someone had screwed a handle into it. I pulled it open slowly, heart thumping hard in my chest. Inside was a small room, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. No lights, just the daylight spilling in from the hallway behind me. The walls were old brick, chipped and damp in places. There was a bare mattress on the floor, sagging in the middle and covered with a dirty blanket. In one corner was a pile of clothes, t-shirts, hoodies, socks, worn and stained. Empty food wrappers, fast food bags, crumpled napkins. The smell hit me next, stale sweat, rot, and something sour. Then I saw the phone, a black smartphone plugged into a portable battery pack that was warm to the touch, meaning it was charging recently. The battery pack was connected to a thin orange extension cord that ran up and out a hole in the drywall, leading back toward the main electric panel. Whoever had set this up knew what they were doing. I backed out of the room slowly. My mind was racing. I hadn't heard anything while I was down there, no footsteps, no voices, but someone was clearly living here, maybe still was. I didn't want to be down there another second. I ran back up to my apartment and locked the door behind me. I called Dennis right away. I told him what I found and that he needed to come immediately. He sounded confused at first, then annoyed. Said he'd be there in 20 minutes. He showed up about half an hour later with a crowbar and a flashlight. I led him down to the basement and showed him the hidden room. He didn't say anything for a while, just stood there in the doorway with his hand on his mouth. After a minute or so, he told me the guy who used to rent the upstairs unit, some guy named Gary, had left months ago. At least, that's what Dennis thought. Gary had paid his last month's rent, said he was moving out, gave back the keys, and that was the end of it. But apparently, Gary never really left. He must have had a copy of the key or found another way back in. Dennis said there'd been some break-ins in the area. Maybe Gary was just squatting here when no one was around. The scariest part was how long it must have been going on. Gary had been sneaking in and out of the basement for weeks, maybe months. He was using the laundry room, stealing power, sleeping down there a few feet from where I did my laundry. The noises I heard at night weren't my imagination. They were him moving around, turning on water, maybe even listening to me walking around upstairs. Dennis called the cops. They showed up later that day, took some photos, asked a few questions, and told us to call again if we saw him. I didn't sleep much that night. Every sound in the building made me jump. I kept checking the locks on my windows and the deadbolt on the front door. I didn't feel safe there anymore. A few days later, Dennis had the secret room sealed up. The shelf was bolted to the wall, and the whole area behind it walled off with concrete board and steel brackets. He also had the electric panel rewired to make sure nobody could tap into it again. I appreciated that, but it didn't really fix how I felt. The idea that someone had been so close, watching, hiding, maybe waiting for a time when I wasn't home, it got into my head and stayed there. Even after Gary was officially caught a few weeks later, trying to break into another building down the street, I still felt it. That twitchy, on-edge feeling like someone was nearby, just out of sight. I broke the lease 2 months early, paid the penalty, and left. It wasn't worth it. I found a new place in a high-rise with cameras and doormen and motion lights in the hallways. I've never looked at basements the same way again. Every time I hear a pipe creak or a floorboard shift, I still freeze for just a second, wondering if someone's down there, waiting, listening.